any comments, questions, additions, deletions from board members? No typos? We didn't find a single typo in this thing? Come on. There's got to be one in there. All right, anyway.
All the credit goes to Amanda Wolf.
How about a motion to approve in a second?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Thank you. All right, then we'll go through a roll call vote. Chris?
Yeah, just for the record, Ms. Paulson Alvarez did arrive at 7:42, and she would be eligible to vote on this. So, Vice Chairman Brincroft,
Yes.
Councilmember Little,
Yes.
Paulson Alvarez,
Yes.
Ms. McNeil,
Yes.
Mr. Delory,
Yes.
Mr. Zucker,
Yes.
Mr. Perrella,
Yes.
Mr. Fiore,
Yes.
and Chairman Anderson.
Yes. Mr. Weber, Ms. Alfonso, thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
And I'd like to say one thing about these resolutions, that they were extremely well done, Mr. Warner. And is Amanda on somewhere, maybe?
Ms. Wolf is with us, yes.
But Ms. Wolf, thank you, and Mr. Warner for doing a terrific job on the resolutions. They're very well done and a lot of nuances in them. So thank you for doing such a terrific job on them.
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I do note, Mr. Chairman, we do have an application, Beechwood at Summit, that's being carried. Perhaps in case there's anyone here for that one, we might want to make that announcement.
All right. Do we want anyone related to that? Related to the application entered into the this group here? See
I
anybody?
don't know if we have, I don't think we have counsel here, Mr. Chairman. I didn't see Mr. Maynard
Okay.
with us, but I will, with your permission, Mr. Chairman, let the record reflect and more importantly, let members of the public know that Beechwood at Summit LLC, 43 Woodland Avenue, that application will not be heard tonight. That application was carried, but it's being carried with, let me emphasize, with further notice. So there will be new notice. It's being carried to our next meeting date, April 26, 2021 at 7:30 p.m. This same Zoom web-based platform for remote access for the meeting.
Okay, very good. All right, so let's move on to the meeting minutes. We have meeting minutes for February 10th and meeting minutes for February 22nd. So let's go with February 10th first. Anyone have any comments or questions, additions, deletions to the February 10th meeting minutes? Hearing none, I have one question, Chris, on the bottom of page 2. It's, I guess, this is under Bristol Myers Squibb, so it'd be, I believe, the third sentence, which begins, Mr. Weber also noted that the applicant is seeking to amend their application for the relocation of the guardhouse light poles. Should there be an "and" in there? Isn't it both is relocation of the guardhouse and the light poles, as opposed to guardhouse light poles? I think they're more consistent with the resolution.
Yeah, we could add that if required, no problem at all.
I think I would just add the word
And
that's my only comment on that on the February 10th meeting minutes. All right, so a voice vote on the meeting minutes, approval of the meeting minutes.
Motion second and voice vote would be great, Mr. Chairman.
I need a motion to approve
So moved.
and a second.
Second.
All right, and
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And seeing none.
all right, okay, moving on to next February 22nd meeting minutes. Any comments, additions, deletions, or anything of that nature with these minutes? All right, having heard none, can I get a motion to approve and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Right, thanks.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Seeing none.
I'm particularly happy to read some of these meeting minutes because it actually showed that we've accomplished two things this year so far. And Bristol Myers Squibb and our audio retail establishment. So that's good. And so I guess that moves us on to our upcoming public hearing here with Primrose School Franchising Company, which was carried from February 22nd of this year. And I know that both Mr. Warner and Mr. Giannetti would like to sort of give us an overview of sort of where we've been on this journey and where we are now. And so between, I don't know who wants to go first with regard to that, but I think we need a little bit of a tutorial, a reminder of sort of where we've been, where we're going, and what we're going to be doing tonight.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman, I'll jump in if I could squeeze ahead of Mr. Giannetti. And you're right, Mr. Chairman, we did carry this again to March 22nd this evening. And we do have a time to act extension in writing from applicant's counsel through the end of this month. This is our 7th hearing date. However, in fairness, we only had 6 hearings at which we had testimony. I don't want to remind everybody, but we did have one we may all recall that we didn't have testimony at early on in the process in September or thereabouts. But it's my understanding that the applicant has further revised by reducing the magnitude of the deviations and the scope of the project once again. So I would defer to Mr. Giannetti to give us a brief explanation of that. And then it's my understanding he has one witness to present those changes, after which presumably then, after questioning by the board professionals and members of the public on those changes, we can then proceed to public testimony, both fact testimony and any expert testimony from the public. That's my understanding, but I'll, with your permission, Mr. Chairman, I'll allow applicant's counsel, Mr. Giannetti, to give us a brief overview.
Great. Good evening, Mr. Giannetti. How are you?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Warder, and good evening, Chairman Anderson. It's good to see the board again. This board is aware, Craig Giannetti of the law firm Day Pitney, on behalf of the applicant Primrose School Franchising Company. As Mr. Warner indicated, we were last before the board on January 25th, where we effectively completed our testimony with Mr. Seckler on some revised plans and dealing with the traffic or updated traffic study, as well as the planning testimony. And there was some additional public questioning / comment, as well as comments and questions from the board. We were scheduled to be heard February 22nd. We did have some revised plans, but we also were having a meeting with the county to discuss the ingress and egress on Morris Avenue, and therefore was carried from the February 22nd meeting, and have further submitted revised plans to the board with, we believe, some good changes that will hopefully satisfy a lot of the comments we've heard. And as you'll hear tonight, just to kind of highlight the summary of the plan changes, and these are identified in the March 1st submission letter of Stonefield Engineering. Probably one of the biggest ones is switching the access point on Morris Avenue from an ingress and egress and widening the drive aisle in that area to allow two-way traffic. You recall previously, you could, under the prior plan, and as exists today, you could only pull in to the site from Morris Avenue and then would go out to Gates Avenue. In addition, there was, not since the last meeting, the parking configuration has been adjusted a little bit as well. However, we still remain conforming to the parking, as the board recalls that we are no longer proposing an additional office use and have agreed to restrict that that it's not going to be used for anything but the Primrose School, and we'll have further testimony in that as well. And then there's some other things with respect to relocation of the trash enclosure and some of the signage. One thing we haven't had a chance to present to the board, but was, I believe, in our February resubmission, was the building addition shrunk, and therefore the footprint of the building shrunk. So now, if you recall, we previously required a building coverage variance by exceeding the maximum of 30%. Well, now we are just under that 30% requirement with 29 point something percent. So we're just under that 30% standard. So therefore, we no longer need a building coverage variance. So again, now we're dealing with a few variances related to fence wall height and maximum fence height, the parking buffer, which you recall is an existing condition to the adjacent commercial property, the residential buffer, which is already an existing condition, and we are in fact improving that residential buffer, not only in distance, but also in having a new fence along that property line. And also importantly, the playground equipment are located outside of that residential buffer. And then there was another variance related to some of the setback and directional signage. So that's kind of a general summary of those plan changes. I have with me Matt Seckler from Stonefield Engineering, who's been previously accepted as an expert in the field of traffic engineering and planning, to testify as to these changes and the support for the reduced number of variances. And then we also have, or should have, the rest of our team, which would include our architect, Jim Cassay, and Josh Klein, in case there is any additional questions with respect to anything as to architecture or civil engineering. But from a civil engineering point, there weren't too many changes. Drainage is still the same and things of that nature. So with that long-winded intro, I'd like to call Matthew Seckler.
Okay. And if I may, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Seckler, as you know, you remain under oath. And I take it your license as a professional planner and an engineer in the state of New Jersey both remain in good standing. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, I'll defer to the chair as to whether the board continues to accept you as an expert in both fields, professional planning and traffic engineering.
Great.
I don't see that we have any issues with
Okay.
continuing on with Mr. Seckler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Giannetti, I think you can lead the direct.
Great. So, Mr. Seckler, as I noted in my intro, there's been some revisions to the plan since we were last here, January 25th, and completed your testimony, which I gave a summary of. I guess initially, are there any exhibits that we can mark into evidence with respect to on the board's website with respect to a color rendering of the site plan, as well as an updated architectural or 3D rendering exhibit?
Yes, and I'll share my screen to mark both of those exhibits in for the record.
Great, and I believe they'll be A14 and A15 respectively.
Okay, so A14 is a rendered site plan exhibit prepared by Stonefield Engineering Design as a date prepared of 3/15/2021. It is a single sheet, and it represents an aerial image behind the colorized version of our site plan with the landscaping on, as well as coloring to help the board and the public see the various buildings, drive aisles, and grass areas. Then we have, I believe, A15, which is a 7-page set prepared by KLS Architect. The date on it is last revised 2/5/2021.
And I believe too, there's some sheets were revised 2/5/21. I believe some others were March 23rd, 21.
Yes.
But we wanted to keep the package, similar to how we've shown the board this kind of exhibit package before.
Correct. And this includes, as you said, the second sheet, EX1, happens to have that March revised date. So I will call out the various sheet numbers as I refer to them in my testimony.
Great. So maybe, I guess, since our last meeting, we've been busy, and maybe you can just summarize for the board what you and the development team in Primrose looked at and some of the changes proposed with respect to the site.
Absolutely, and I think you did a good job of summarizing them, but I'll kind of show them and point the board to the physical locations where you would see physical changes. Again, I'm referring to sheet A14, and one of the, we sought to remove some of the issues that the board and the public had with the application, as well as try to address a number of the variances and continually whittle down the variances. One of the variances that we had previously was the building coverage. If you look at this project now, we've cut back the building. It used to extend much closer to Webster Avenue. In cutting back this building and reshaping the new addition to the building, we are actually now compliant as it relates to building coverage, which is under 30%, which is the standard. So the building shape, its proximity to Webster Avenue, all have improved as it relates to the application. It's now actually 36.7 feet back from the Webster Avenue right-of-way line, the building is. And I'll show you in some the architectural renderings in a second in terms of how that looks from Webster Avenue or going eastbound to Morris Avenue, how it looks now that the building has been pushed back and now that we have a compliant building coverage. As it relates to building coverage, and again, I'll kind of hit a number of these items. By moving the building back, we're able to reduce the size of the walls and fences that were along the Webster Avenue frontage. As of now, we have no wall that is higher than 4 feet. That's the wall itself, not counting the fence on top. Previously, we had walls as high as 8 feet with the design that we had earlier. So we've cut down the wall height to a 4-foot max for any singular wall. We do have walls that are a maximum 4 feet closest to Webster Avenue. Those walls are about 5.5 feet back from the sidewalk. Then we have generally 8.5 feet or larger than an 8.5 feet buffer area where we are planting. And then we've proposed a second wall that reaches no higher than 3.3 feet in height, which will have a 6-foot high fence on that. That fence is 6 feet high to ensure the children's safety that are in the playground above that fence. So again, we've made a number of additions in terms of being able to reduce the wall heights and fence heights as it relates to the Webster Avenue frontage. We did reduce one of the variances, which was related to the combination wall and fence height, where no wall or fence, I think, could be greater than 10 feet, and now all of them are under the 10 feet line at 9.3 feet for any single wall and fence height combination. So we reduced the variance as related to that. And again, obviously the building coverage variance as well. So those were two big additions that we made as it related to the Webster Avenue frontage. In addition, in the rear of the site, adjoining the adjacent lot, the adjacent residential lot, we have increased the planted buffer area, the residential buffer. It is now 17.5 feet of plantings. That is an increase over, I believe it was 16 feet before. In addition, we've increased the distance to the fence to 22 feet before you reach the sound reducing composite fence. It previously was 18 feet. So again, we're continuing to push our development further from the residences in the rear of the property. In addition, as the council mentioned earlier, we've outlined here in gray a dashed line, which is the residential buffer, and we've located the equipment, the playground equipment, outside of the residential buffer. So the residential buffer is essentially plantings, landscape screening, composite fence for noise reduction, and then just general turf area within the playground equipment is within the residential buffer as it relates to the nearest residential property on Webster Avenue. Again, reminding the board as we kind of work back around Webster Avenue, Webster Avenue actually has or allows in this zone a 0-foot setback. In other words, there is no front yard setback requirement for Webster Avenue, and 3-story buildings are permitted here. So although we do have combination fence heights, or I would say a series of walls that may exceed the variance, we would be permitted to have a 3-story structure right up on this property line. And in fact, the existing structure itself, I believe, is about 5 feet from the property line and is about 18 feet in height. So again, what we'll see shortly, the plantings that we have here, I think, soften the frontage along Webster Avenue compared to not only the existing condition, what would be permitted for a building in that area. I think this is a good time to call up Exhibit A15, which is the renderings. I'll refer to RE1. This is now the rendering that you would see if you're going eastbound on Morris Avenue. As you could see, the Primrose sign has been pushed back. This used to be like a chamfered end. The playground equipment you could see is nicely screened. You see the low maximum wall height of 4 feet on the lower wall. The upper wall is a maximum wall height of 3.5 feet with the fence on top of that. So again, this is what we believe is a vast improvement. I believe I have an earlier exhibit before the board. Council, I don't know what the last version of the architectural rendering was.
If that's dated July 20th, that would be.
It's December 18th.
Oh, December 18th. And that would be probably A13 that we're referring to.
A13. So again, unfortunately, I think, well, I could probably do this side by side. Let me see if I can put them side by side. Trying to put them side by side. Hopefully the board could kind of see this here. The difference between the two, I know it's a little zoomed out. The one on the right is A13, the old architectural rendering with the chamfered version of the building. You could see the walls and fence heights that totaled over 14 feet, located about less than 5 feet from the property line. Again, we pushed them back, able to enhance the screening all the way around the Morris Avenue frontage. So again, you see a building that is now pushed back significantly and less imposing on the Webster Avenue frontage. So this is the improvement that we made architecturally and also as it relates to the building coverage between the two exhibits. Again, pushed much further back, less imposing onto the Webster Avenue streetscape. I'll now go back to sharing just a single screen. And I will go to the second exhibit, and this is also kind of be a comparison, so I'll flip back and forth. But you could see here, this is titled EX1. It's the second sheet of Exhibit A15. This is what you see now in the existing condition. Again, you have a building that's about 17 or 18 feet, located about 5 feet off the property line. Again, that similar chamfered end that we eliminated in the previous version of the, in this current version of the plan. So again, you see a building that is compliant as it relates to setback. Again, the building could be right up on the property line, but we are seeking a variance because we have a wall and fence in the front yard. But again, I believe that, you know, again, in terms of how the residents or passersby would experience this building, I think we have an improved condition, even though it's a variance condition, because of these wall and fence tiers that go back into the property to help shield and protect the children on the playground. So again, I just want to highlight the differences between the existing condition, which is EX1, and the proposed condition now, which is RE1. So those were the changes as it relates to the Webster Avenue frontage. I will now go back to the site plan exhibit, sheet A14, as relates to, I think, one of the other big changes to the application based on conversations we heard from the board and the public. What we've done based on conversations that we had with the county is that we've widened the driveway on Morris Avenue to permit two-way traffic. This allows for ingress and egress so that not every vehicle leaving the site needs to exit via Gates Avenue. This was based on, again, the feedback regarding the fact that all the traffic was being pushed out on Gates Avenue previously. We've done this widening and able to get two-way flow in and out of the site via Morris Avenue. So we think this is an enhancement from a circulation standpoint. We believe this is an enhancement in terms of you know, some of the existing conditions of congestion that were discussed by members of the public.
And Mr. Sackler, you mentioned based upon conversations in a meeting with the county, I guess just for, you know, reminder, so Morris Avenue is a county road?
Correct.
And so the county the Morris County Planning Board has jurisdiction over Morris Avenue and any improvements and any of the ingress associated with it.
That is correct.
And I guess, I think in the submission letter, there was reference that the feedback received was positive, but a formal submission still needs to be made to the county, which is standard with respect to these applications, where any approval we would get would still be subject to obtaining county approval.
Yeah, and again, I believe we've actually made that made the resubmission package, but we have not received a formal review letter from the county planning board yet. But we did again have positive feedback regarding the ability to have ingress and egress as long as the driveway was widened to the dimensions that we are showing on this plan. Along with kind of creating this two-way driveway, there was some rework necessary to the parking field. Our parking count was reduced, but still is compliant with the ordinance. We are proposing 35 parking spaces where the ordinance requires 31. In our traffic study, and again, there has been extensive testimony regarding our traffic study and our study of existing sites. Even when we utilize the 10-minute drop-off and pickup time frame for parents, we came up with in our traffic study a 32 parking space maximum demand required at any one period of time. So again, we believe that 35 parking spaces are compliant per code and compliant per operational performance of a site like this. So we believe that the improvement and obviously the enhancement of being able to provide a two-way driveway on Morris Avenue while still remaining compliant with the parking is a positive for this application. In addition, we removed a number of other variances. There was a variance as it relates to curb height throughout the parking lot. It was previously non-conforming at 3 inches. We've replaced all the curb as part of this plan to be compliant at 6 inches. So another variance you could cross off the list as part of this redesign. In addition, there was a pre-existing non-conforming as it related to parking buffer between our lot and lot 3, which is the commercial property to our east. We are now compliant for about 65% of that frontage now. Basically where the new parking spaces or the new parallel parking spaces have been designed, along with the dumpster area, we are in compliant with that 5-foot buffer separation between the adjoining lot. We are still existing non-compliant as it relates to the 5 parking spaces that are to remain a little further south into the site. But that's actually a better non-compliance because these parking spaces are 3.3 feet off the property line, where previously the parking spaces on the northern side were 2.7 feet off the property line. So we've created a area of frontage that is compliant and also improved the pre-existing non-conforming condition as part of this redesign. Walking through how this site would operate as it relates to these 3 parallel spaces. These 3 parallel spaces will be signed specifically for the executive staff of the building or the daycare center, which are the ones that arrive the earliest, the first ones that arrive before any students arrive, so they could get into these parallel parking spaces before any of the additional staff or parents come to the site to drop off or pick up. So again, with the understanding these parallel spaces are located in a location closest to what will be the busiest driveway. We've signed them accordingly. I think we gave them specific titles of director, assistant director, and office staff, but we'd like to just designate them as an executive staff level in case the naming changes of the various roles of the daycare facility. So those are the 3 parking spaces closest to Morris Avenue, these parallel spaces. In addition, we've designated all the spaces with markings that indicate whether they are drop-off or staff spaces, with the understanding that the drop-off spaces are reserved for drop-off only during those peak time periods, typically the 7 to 9 in the morning, the 4:30 or 4 to 6:30 in the evening. So that is how that site will operate. Working ourselves around to the exit on Gates Avenue, we've proposed the no right turn sign at our site driveway so that all vehicles leaving via Gates Avenue will be instructed by regulation to make the left turn onto Gates Avenue to return to Morris Avenue. So that was something discussed at the previous hearing that we wanted to make sure we got in our plans accordingly. Lastly, we've increased again our residential buffer by increasing the area located between our property and the nearest residential property on Webster Avenue from the previous iteration. But again, I remind the board that we've made significant progress in terms of upgrading the residential buffer in the rear of our property for all of the residential properties that we abut against, including the one on Gates Avenue, compared to the existing condition. We're proposing the 6-foot high board-on-board fence along the property line, and again, the enhanced buffer between ourselves and that fence. A couple other changes that were
Mr.
made.
Steckler,
Yes,
you also have a fence there so that people can't walk through from Webster Avenue into the parking lot. There's still that fence there?
correct. There's a fence still next to the hatch space next to 11. There's a fence located in that location so that there really is just a vegetated area, but no pass through between Webster Avenue and our property.
Thank you.
Couple other items we previously had a monument sign located in the planting area near the entrance door to the site. That has been removed. So we no longer have I believe it was 2 or 3 variances as it related to that freestanding monument sign. So the only signs on the site will be the 2 building mounted signs, one facing eastbound traffic on the Webster Avenue frontage, one facing westbound traffic, I guess on the side of the Morris Avenue frontage, basically the same location as the existing sign today. Those are the 2 building mounted signs. They are fully compliant. We do have a directional sign, and I'll show you what it looks like in an image in a second. That sign, we intended to be compliant with height. We intended to be compliant with size. The only thing we don't believe we could be compliant with is its location. It would be required to be 25 feet back from the curb line and 20 feet from the side yard line, which would put it behind the building, making it completely useless from a directional sign standpoint, and then in middle of the drive aisle, which again would make it render it useless. So again, we are seeking variances as it relates to the location of this very small directional sign, with really its main purpose being when you're on eastbound Morris Avenue, again, you may see the building sign at first, but we want to make sure that people coming up this direction will be able to identify that this is the driveway for this building in this lot. So again, I will now flip over to A15 again to show the signage from all these locations. So again, RE1 has that primrose letter sign compliant. This is the one closest to the Webster Avenue frontage. This is RE2. This is the Morris Avenue west direction. You'll see the primrose sign. This is in the same location as the existing sign on the building today. We've also looking to incorporate the existing address number, which exists today along the frontage of Morris Avenue, as you can see here on RE2. We also are, I don't know if this was in the earlier version of the plan, but there are 3 former windows. These are bricked up windows that we're looking to add a little more light into the interior of the building. We're looking to bring them back as true glass windows or true windows along the driveway. And then right here, this small little primrose sign is that directional sign that we're seeking variances as it relates to the location. Again, it has a maximum 2 feet off the ground. That is per your ordinance requirements. Maximum of 8-inch letter height, which is per your ordinance. But again, we do think it's important to have a directional sign, most importantly for the eastbound direction traffic. But again, we wanted to highlight this sign in this location.
And I guess, Mr. Steckler, with that sign height variance, because the sign is on a slope, so one side is kind of longer, higher than the other. You know, when you take the average, the sign conforms to the sign height. Is that correct?
Correct. That's how we took the interpretation, again, because it is on a little bit of a slope. We believe that is the intention of the ordinance. Again, I guess we could drop this another 6 inches or so, but then we're getting almost below the curb height at that point in some areas. So we believe this is probably as conforming as we could get in terms of the sign dimensions and still have it be a usable sign. Just going through some other images. This is RE3. This is Webster Avenue. Webster. looking towards Morris. You could see car dealership in the distance here. What you see here again is that landscaping, that maximum 4-foot high wall. You can't even see the 3-foot high wall that is, or 3.3 foot high wall at maximum that is behind it because of the screening that we've done. Again, we believe this is a vast improvement compared to the existing building and even what would be permitted. Again, you'd be permitted to have a 3-story building, right up where this small wall is, located right on the site. So we believe that this tiered approach is actually much gentler for the traveling public and the residents on Webster. Next one is sheet RE4. This is kind of flying above the fence line, on the property that is nearest to us on Gates. Just looking at the site itself, you could see the way that the tree heights are here. Again, no monument sign. There used to be a monument sign proposed here. No building sign. There used to be a building sign facing the parking lot. That has also been removed. This is basically the driveway that is heading towards Gates, looking into the site again. This is more of a street level view of the landscaping type design, the building, the way that the glass line looks on the site. Again, just trying to walk everybody through the board. This is the RE5 exhibit.
Okay.
Yep. You were going to say something, Councilor?
I was just going to, confirm that this is RE5 that you were referring to for the record.
Perfect. And last one here, this is flying a little bit higher up. This is an aerial view again of the parking lot, highlighting the 2-way drive aisle now that we're proposing on Morris Avenue. And again, the overall kind of landscaping in this area, the striping plan that is proposed, the American flag that we will bring down every day per the design. So overall, those are the changes that we are making to the site. There are obviously a couple of, there's a number of improvements. Again, the impervious coverage continues to go down. We're well below the requirements in that case. The other variances that we are seeking, and I think we may have called them out as waivers, but your planner counted them as variances, relates to lighting. Our lighting, the light that is located closest to the commercial property at nearest lot 3, this is near the parallel parking spaces, has very slight spillage onto the adjoining lot. We don't believe that this is a negative condition. All these lights, we agree to turn off other than to security levels an hour after close, which is about 7:30. So again, there may be even some summer days the lights don't even reach full capacity before we turn them off or put them onto a security level. So we don't believe that this lighting is negative. In addition, we do have a lighting variance where we exceed the lighting in interior walkways. And again, this being a childcare facility with the parking lot being or the exit and entrance being internal to the site, in the rear of the site, we believe that the variance that we're seeking, which is a minimum variance, we believe is warranted. Again, so that the children at night, during the winter months, have proper and safe access in and out of the building. Again, we do agree that we'll turn the lighting down to security levels after 1 hour after close. So we don't believe this is a deterrent in any way or a negative in any way, as these lights will be turned off at about 7:30 at night. Again, this is the B zone where you could have restaurants and things of that nature later into the night. And this is a site that no weekend activity and activity that dies down and basically is vacant or empty after 6:30 at night. And again, by 7:30, we would go down to that security lighting in the parking lot.
And
So-
Mr. Seckler, with respect to that lighting variance or waiver, the foot candles, it's dealing with the light being spilled or shown on the ground in front of it, and that these lights will, or is that correct?
Yes, this is as it relates to the, basically the walkways in front of the building. This is that waiver is not requesting anything along the residential property lines. On the residential properties, we are at 0 foot candles. So we
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you asked.
I was going to say, in all these lights, as previously testified, have the shield and the pointing down to ensure that the light is not spilling out towards the property lines.
Correct. And again, we're at the one kind of waiver we're seeking is right near the side of this commercial building. We are a little above 1 foot candle, but it dramatically drops to 0.3, which is compliant about 10 feet into that property. And again, we could either work with the board and relocating this fixture if necessary, but we also think that considering this is a light that goes down to security level 1 hour after close, 7:30, and has very minimal transgression onto the commercial property next door, we don't believe that's a negative for the design. So overall, I think this is a project where we've worked with this board and the public to try to eliminate as many variants as possible. In fact, there was one variance I don't think I mentioned that we eliminated just by reading the code a little better. We do not believe that we require any loading zone for the type of use that we have. When we had the office and childcare use combined, we did require a loading zone. But by eliminating the office use, no loading zone is required. We discussed previously the operations and how limited the loading is for this building and for this use. We've eliminated the intensity that we originally proposed on the site. We keep reducing the impervious coverage well below what is required. We are now compliant as it relates to all of our bulk standards. With the variances that we're seeking are all either pre-existing that we're improving, that's related to some of the residential buffers. In fact, I believe that we have the largest residential buffer out of all of the B zone properties along Morris Avenue that are residential that back up, that are commercial that back up to residential. So we have those variances that we're improving. And then the other ones, the only ones that we're creating are the wall and fence height variances, which again, I think are an improvement over having the building up on that line being 18 or even 18 feet or even 3 stories high. And we've been improving those, bringing those heights down significantly from the earlier application. And the directional sign, which again, I think is a very minimal variance as relates to where we are with this application. And we do think that it does provide a safety aspect for vehicles and a traffic circulation aspect for bringing vehicles in on Morris Avenue eastbound. And with this redesign, we're looking to take some of the pressure off of Gates Avenue by having our 2-way access point along Morris Avenue. So again, I believe that the improvements that we've made, I know it's been a lot of hours of testimony, it's been a lot of hours of redesign, but we think that we've reached a point where we've really taken all of the variances out of this application outside of some real minimal variances that are absolutely necessary for this application.
And thank you, Mr. Seckler. And with respect to the building footprint changes, is the applicant still proposing the same number of classrooms on the first floor? Maybe you just talk about the change to the interior, in particular the second floor as well.
Yeah, so as part of this application, what we've done is we've moved some of the non-classroom related items onto the second floor of the facility. So that includes the indoor play area, the warming kitchen that has been moved to the second floor of this building. But we still maintain the same number of classrooms and the same license capacity. We are willing, if this board finds favorably on this application, to obviously have a condition on the maximum childcare licensing that we'll be able to have for this building itself. We'll not have, I believe, previously testified, more than 200 students on this site. That is unchanged with this redesign. We just look to unload some of the first floor items that were not necessarily 100% required on the first floor and move them up to the second floor.
Right. And maybe just touch base, with respect to this change to Morris Avenue being ingress and egress, basically from a traffic standpoint, the benefits and how it functions with that intersection, as well as Gates Avenue with respect to level service and things of that nature.
Absolutely. Previously, we were getting levels of service that were up to the level service E range on Gates Avenue because all of our traffic was leaving via Gates Avenue, some vehicles to make a right, some vehicles to make a left. Now we've reallocated the directional flow of traffic and basically assigned some of the vehicles to come out via, the majority of the vehicles to come in and out via Morris Avenue. There still may be some parents or some staff that are parked closer to the Gates Avenue driveway that may decide to utilize that, but we basically distributed based on driver behavior between the two access points, and that severely reduces the queuing and delays on Gates Avenue. We've been able to reduce the delay by over 20 seconds at Gates Avenue by having the second access point from the site onto Morris Avenue. In addition, our queuing, there was some concern earlier about the fact there's on-street parking located along Gates Avenue near this commercial building. We've been able to reduce the queuing in that area to under 2 vehicles as the maximum queue along Gates Avenue by, again, distributing the traffic between the two driveways and permitting the egress movement at Morris Avenue directly from our site.
And after the revised plans were submitted, we did receive a series of updated staff reports. Have you had an opportunity to review those staff reports?
Yes, I have.
And mainly, I guess I'll go through in order. There's first a community or a report from Krista Anderson, the zoning officer, dated March 5th, 2021. And effectively, the main comment there on the second page related to trash and recycling location, noting that the open fence with respect to the trash enclosure is not acceptable as the ordinance requires the trash enclosure to have solid screening. Did Stonefield look at that, and as to the various options that can be done to address that?
Yeah, and we're agreeable to having a solid fence in that area, so we will comply with that comment.
And I noted it says up in the lighting, it says none of the lighting comments in my February 17, 2020 memo have been addressed. So I don't believe we've seen a February 17, 2021 memo. I do know Ms. Anderson had some comments as to lighting previously, and just making sure that the architectural plans match the engineered plans, particularly with the wall sconces, and that we conform to the height requirement with that. And the applicant remain, still agreeable to complying with that.
That is correct.
Okay. Next, the fire chief, and there was no comment. Next, there's another from the police chief, again, no comment. Then moving to the board engineer review letter, engineer review number 5, dated March 16th, 2021. And you've had an opportunity to review that memorandum?
Yes.
And are there any comments or issues that you feel you need to address from that review letter?
No, again, I think that we've provided the testimony stipulating to the maximum student enrollment for this building, which I think is basically one of the crux of a lot of the comments as it relates to the building size and the way the interior of the building has been redone. I think everything else I don't take exception to. Either we would be able to provide the various revisions that are being requested, or I believe we've provided the testimony. I will state that truck turns, as it relates to any delivery vehicle or any fire truck, those type of truck turns, they're going to maintain the previously testified route of coming in on Morris Avenue and out on Gates Avenue. We believe the templates still work properly, making those various maneuvers.
And there's been no change to the prior testimony with respect to deliveries, trash pickup and recycling pickup, and how that functions and timing, except I guess that the trash is on the other side instead of the left side of the plan, it's on the right side of the plan.
Correct. And then there was one comment related to tree removal, landscape plans, and working with the city forester. Again, we are, whenever the city forester has comments out about, we will be happy to work with and address and comply with.
Mr. Sickler, if I might interrupt Mr. Giannetti, now that
Sure.
you touched on the forester, looking at the landscape plan looks very nice. Is that intended to be fully sprinklered in order to maintain its, quality through the summer, et cetera?
I believe it is sprinklered. I don't know if it's fully sprinklered. So I will, if that's something the board would like to see, I'm sure we could comply with. I don't know if all of the vegetation requires sprinklers. That's the reason why I'm just hesitating that it fully sprinklered.
Would you stipulate that it would be sprinklered, subject to the review and approval of the city forester, i.e.
Yes.
as fully as he or she
Yes.
desires?
Yes,
Okay,
absolutely.
Yes.
Thank you.
So then you mentioned the city forester and that we would comply with his comments with respect to the landscaping. The board engineer's office also had a separate traffic impact review number 4 dated March 17th, 2021. Do you have an opportunity to review that memo?
Yes, I have. The only comment I'll make, because again, I think it was generally comments, not requesting specific testimony, is again, although our square footage is larger than some of the other comparable sites, I think the board's traffic engineer and myself both agree that really it's the number of students, employees that are the trip generation aspect on the site, and that number is consistent with the other comparable sites that we studied. That even though this site is larger in square footage, the enrollment will be consistent with those sites. And again, we are committing to a 200 student maximum.
And with respect to his third comment, we previously indicated we would be willing to record any resolution of approval which has its or its list of conditions in connection with the approval, which will include a condition as to not being able to re-rent out that second floor space or convert it to another use without first obtaining either board approval or building official approval.
And again, I think that the fact that we are utilizing now that second floor for an indoor classroom, warming kitchen, things of that nature, I think hopefully helps reduce any concerns about that being rented out for a secondary user, since it's now part and parcel with the operations of the daycare.
And with respect to the traffic also, I guess too, and it wasn't in the review, I think it was in the engineered review letter, as to the site distances, I guess particularly on Morris Avenue and the sufficiency of them.
Yep, and we've shown them on our plan. They're the triangles that are dashed out on the plan, and we believe they are sufficient, and they are shown on the plan.
And then there is the construction official review dated March 10th with no additional comments. The March 11th city forester comments where he asked to meet with him to kind of go through and get on the same page as to the trees being removed and which trees are being proposed and how they will be preserved going forward. And we agree to do that as part of any condition of approval.
Yes, and again, just to, what we have attempted to do on this rendering, and again, that's A14, there's some trees that are outlined but are from the aerial below. That's 2 trees along Webster, the trees along the commercial property line. Those, again, were ones they were intending to keep and remain. So we've attempted to illustrate that, but we'll work with the forester and highlight and again, make sure these trees are healthy even before we begin construction on the site, should this board act favorably.
And then there was the health department review letter or comment letter dated March 11, 2021. And there were some questions as to the warming condition and food safety training. If you could just speak to Primrose, what's required of their staff with respect to food safety training.
Yeah, all members that are involved in the food prep or the food distribution goes through a food handling training program. And again, they'd be happy to discuss that with the health department directly should the board act favorably on this application.
The Historic Preservation Commission review letter dated March 15th, 2021, though they didn't have the benefit of the renderings, talked previously about the streetscape and effectively the mass of the addition. And I know you've testified as to it already, but just addressing again the improvements, not only to what we previously proposed, but also to what's existing on the property there today with respect to mass and proximity of the building along the frontage.
Yeah, and again, I think, when looking at massing or monolithic imposing profile is what I believe the review letter said, there's a number of zoning standards that would allow us to evaluate that in an analytical form. One is floor area ratio. That's the amount of building space you have on your property compared to the lot size. This zone allows up to 75% of floor area ratio, meaning that 75% of the lot area can be comprised of building. We're at 40.9%. So we're nearly half of what is permitted as it relates to floor area ratio. Another threshold, another analytical piece as it relates to zoning is the height as it relates to stories. 3 stories are permitted. We are proposing 2. So again, not the maximum of what's allowed. We have less than the maximum amount of building coverage, so we are compliant in that standpoint. We have we are below the impervious coverage amount, and as I reiterated when we looked at the various renderings for this building, we are allowed to build up to the lot line on the Webster Avenue and Morris Avenue frontages, meaning that we could have a building right up basically onto the sidewalk almost on both of those areas. And what we've done is we've significantly pushed the building back, again, 37 feet back from the right-of-way line along Webster Avenue. That's significantly further back than the existing building, significantly further back than the previous versions of this building. So we do not believe that we are an imposing building or a monolithic. So again, I think that what we've provided here, and I'll again flip up the renderings. We've provided what I believe is a building that is compliant with the design standards that would govern something that would that govern imposing profiles or monolithic buildings. So I do believe that this is a softened streetscape approach compared to what was previously there or what can be built by zone.
And then the Environmental Commission review letter dated March 14th, 2021, which is really just comments noting that they support the variances being granted and would recommend approval. And they had no further comments on the vehicular movement changes, trash receptacle location, or signage.
That's correct.
And maybe I know you previously testified at length at the last meeting as to the variances being requested. And I know you kind of touched on either the improvements and or the need for the variances, but if you could kind of just break it out real quickly with respect to them as to the positive and negative criteria, if there's been any change to your prior testimony supporting them, given that most of them have been improved or eliminated.
Yep, and absolutely. And again, even before I talk about the variances, again, I just want to remind the board, this is a permitted use. This is allowed in the B zone. The B zone speaks to having the type of uses that people go to continually, that are used on a daily basis, that see a lot of back and forth activity. That's what's requested. That's what's talked about within the master plan and the development regulations for B zone properties. And again, this is compliant. We're not seeking use variance. We'd be talking to a whole nother group of people if we were. So this is, again, a permitted use on this project. As it relates to variances, there are the couple of variances as it relates to the wall and fence height combinations. Again, basically because of the way that we've tiered the fencing, I don't believe we're creating a negative impact because you basically just see a couple small walls, you see landscaping. I think you saw some really nice exhibits in terms of how the streetscape is going to be improved from Webster Avenue. But we are seeking a variance as it relates to those items. But again, I think when you're looking from a visual environment perspective, I think that it's an enhancement or a benefit towards the what the MLUL looks at in terms of the purposes of planning and zoning. Again, we are looking to make up the grade. There's significant grade change on this property as it relates to the finished floor of the existing building that's remains and the existing grade on Webster Avenue. There's a significant difference in there, and we were looking to make it up within the grade of the property itself by providing these smaller tiered walls. So that is a couple of variances there. We
And I
have
guess with that, Mr. Steckler, just on that point, if you've spoken, I know with obviously your office and Mr. Klein, who's a civil engineer, in order to comply and or remove those wall variances, theoretically, could you comply by just grading out the area, but then lose some of that landscaping being proposed?
Yeah, you probably could reduce some of the wall height. I don't know if you'll be able to get down to limiting the variance.
I meant if you look at it as if you looked at the two walls almost as like a combined wall.
Yes, yeah. So if you just grade it up from the property line to this top wall, what you would have is probably a 201 slope, which would be basically very difficult to vegetate. You'd have a tough time basically maintaining the vegetation along this frontage if we were to basically create a single wall instead of a double wall tiered system, which is what we're proposing here. So that's the variances as it relates to the walls and fences along Webster Avenue. And again, I just want to show the board the comparison between RE1 and EX1, the existing condition, which is compliant as it relates to wall height because there is no walls, but there is a imposing 18-foot building, which could be as high as 3 stories if they want to expand upwards. And compared that again to what we are showing here on RE1, which is the building pushed back off the property line. But again, by pushing the building back, we're required to have those walls to grade up to the property. And then RE3, which is again what you'd see along Webster Avenue, which is really you majority of the time just see the small wall, the 3-foot wall, because of the 8 feet of vegetation that we're able to plant in that area. The next set of variances, there's 2 as it relates to the directional sign. I think I spent a lot of time talking about it, considering it's such a small sign. Again, the compliant location would be behind the building in the drive aisle. It's a directional sign. It shouldn't be in the travel path, and it should be able to be seen for people looking for where the driveway is located. So that, from a purpose of the MLUL, we believe it meets the, the advancement in terms of, advancing vehicle circulation and traffic safety by providing that sign in that location. I don't see it being any substantial negative impact. It is such a small sign. And again, I think that we are looking to meet the purposes of a directional sign by putting in a location that would be seen by drivers. The other variance is as it relates is the residential buffer. Again, that would require us to have a planting area that occupies basically the first 36 feet back of the property. We are enhancing what is out there today. In fact, we are adding about over 1,200 square feet of planting within that buffer. So again, we are enhancing what is out there compared to the existing condition immensely, but we were not able to meet the full requirement per the code. But again, you're getting over 1,200 square feet more of compliance with this new plan versus the existing condition. And again, I believe this is the largest buffer square footage or largest buffer or most compliant buffer that you have for anywhere within the B zone along Morris Avenue or this stretch of Morris Avenue in this general region of the B zone. We also have the parking buffer variance. That's an existing condition for these 5 parking spaces located closest to the commercial property located to our east. We are compliant in the rear in terms of our buffer between the parking spaces and the property line. So we are compliant with those. And then the lighting variances as it relates to the lights within the walkways near the doorways interior to the site. And then the one light that is located closest to the commercial property that has spillage that, once you go about 5 to 10 feet into the property, becomes compliant just in this one area located on the northern side of the building. So those are the variants we're seeking. Again, we believe the lighting has been designed for to benefit the health, safety, and welfare of the occupants on the site. And again, we believe that it is mitigated in the fact that we go down to security level lighting at 7:30 at night. So we don't see it being a negative impact to the commercial property. And there is no foot candles that spill beyond the property line as it relates to the residential properties.
And I didn't want Mr. Burgess to think we forgot about his review letter, and that's kind of why we were touching and going through those variances. The Burgess and Associates review letter dated March 16th, 2021, which is mostly comment and identifying the variances you just walked through and testified to. I believe there was one comment on page 3 as to the dumpster enclosure and just discussing the functionality of that dumpster area, being in the drive aisle.
Yeah, again, we've agreed earlier on this application that the dumpster style is not one of those, I'd say, commercial dumpsters that has kind of like a forklift style entry. This is more like individual kind of cans or little commercial style cans. So a vehicle, trash vehicle will enter the site, it'll stop in the aisle, the person will get out, open the gates, or the 2-person operation will open, one of the people will open the gates, throw the cans or empty the contents of the cans into the back of the truck, and then they would enter via the Gates Avenue egress. So that is why it could be located in the direction that it is, because it's not one of those kind of forklift operations that requires you to kind of head on or back into the dumpster.
Thank you. So that's effectively what we have, a direct presentation of Mr. Seckler discussing the changes and support for the variances and the traffic changes and circulation. Is there any questions from the board or the board professionals with respect to his testimony or the revised plan?
Thank you, Mr. Giannetti. Thank you, Mr. Sickler. Any members of the board have comments of this witness? Mr. Delory.
I can't hear Mr. Delory.
Yeah,
I see his mouth moving, but I don't hear him. But he's not muted either.
No.
Yeah.
Chris, anything on that one?
It may be the headphones.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I'll blame that one on the dog. I will. So we're memorializing the no tenant on the second floor in the resolution, correct? I know you had mentioned it
Correct.
9 differently, but okay.
And there would be a condition. There would be a condition in the resolution.
And the
As to that.
resolution will be recorded, so it's in the chain of title.
Okay. And then I was looking at the fit plan that's dated 9/30/2020. Is that relevant to this witness?
I think that was an earlier version of the fit plan based on that date. I think there's an updated one.
This is where you have the indoor playground on the second floor.
Maybe I think there's a revised date on there. Maybe that is.
I mean, I don't see it, but I believe.
Okay.
What was the choice of having the indoor playground to be 676 square feet and then have a 2,351 area called administrative and training?
That might be beyond my ability to answer.
Yeah, I could have Jim Cassay, the architect, who I think might be an attendee, if he could be.
He is in the
Brought in.
attendees, Chris.
Yeah, if he could be paneled up. Jim, are you there?
He must have the same dog, I suppose.
Or he might have a restroom break. I don't know.
Okay. Well, I can wait for the.
Oh, there we
Oh,
go.
there he is.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes, sir.
yes.
Okay, sorry about that.
Before you answer, Mr. Cassay, you recognize you remain under oath, correct?
I do.
And your license as an architect in the state of New Jersey remains in good standing?
It does.
And Mr. Chairman, you continue to accept him as an expert in that field on behalf of the board?
Yes.
Please proceed, Mr. Cassay.
Yeah, with regards to the indoor playground and the administrative and training. The indoor playground is not a primary use for playground. They would like to take the children outside. It's really used as a supplemental playground when the weather's bad, and just from a square footage perspective, as far as how many children they would actually be taken up there, that's limited. So the franchise owner wanted to have more flexibility and room for the administrative type stuff. So that was the reasoning behind that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other members of the board have questions of this witness before we go to our board professionals? Oh, yes, Councilmember Little.
Thank you. I think I think a lot of these changes are good. There's less impact on Webster. My main concern is still with the traffic flow and the parking and the impact on the neighborhoods around with the traffic. I wonder, we do have the traffic study that's looking at the new flow, but I'm concerned with the traffic coming in from gates, going out from gates, cars turning within that parking lot. Can you talk about how many cars you expect to be in the parking lot at any time, and how that's going to work with the cars coming in and out and pulling in and out of the spaces, and kind of the flow of the traffic within that parking lot now, where you have ingress and egress both within the parking lot? You also have cars pulling into the drop-off area and pulling out of the drop-off area. I'm very concerned. The 10 minutes seems like a really, really tight window to me anyway, based on my own experiences with 4 kids in 5 years, and trying to deal with people in and out of car seats. And this just seems like a very tight, I'm not sure how this all works. If you could go through it again.
Yep, sure. And again, what we based this on was the sign in, sign out times at other Primrose locations prior to the pandemic. I think it was January of 2020.
Can I just ask you a quick
Yep.
question about that? I know that
Sure.
Berkeley Heights Primrose Center is now working on, there's direct access to the classroom from the outside. At the time when this study was done with the 10 minutes, was that under a similar model to this, where the parents were going into the building and checking into the building?
They were checking into the building. I don't believe they were going into the classroom. I think they were checking into the building.
Because now the Berkeley Heights Primrose, isn't that correct? That they just, the access is directly to each classroom from the outside. So there's no, right? So it's an easier ingress egress. At the time the study was done, was that a different setup?
I think it was a different setup at the time this study was done. I think that may have been a COVID type operation that has been changed over the last year now.
Okay.
But in terms of ingress, egress, vehicles parking, again, based on what we've observed and the analysis of the student drop-off pickup operations, a maximum of 13 parents will be on site at one time, dropping their child off or picking them up. And that's, various forms. Some could be grabbing their child out of the car seat. Some of them could be already at the front door. Some of them could be walking themselves back. But 13 cars would be on the site as relates to a parent within the parking field. At the same time, a number of staff members will be on site. I think at the previous hearings, I showed that the way the staffing works is the staffing actually reaches its maximum rate around lunchtime between 11 and 1, and then starts to go down again, because they have some staff that works kind of part-time the morning shift, some work the evening shift, or the afternoon shift. Some kind of are there to assist with the food facilities. So you basically have a staff that arrives some early, but basically peaks in the middle of the day and then starts to go back down again. So in terms of the amount of traffic that we'd expect on the site at any one time, what I would basically look at is within the traffic study, what our trip generation is. And that would be basically over the hour. We would expect there to be about 74 parents dropping off over the hour. Again, that's 60 minutes of time, but 74 parents would be dropping off during that hour time period, and about 11 staff would be arriving during that same hour. Again, they don't all arrive. It's not a elementary school where they all arrive, at the exact same 5 minutes. So we found is that 13 would be the maximum occupancy of those 74 people arriving quasi simultaneously.
And
In
how
terms of
many
the
cars- I'm sorry, how many cars lengths, like I'm saying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like you expect 5 car lengths can queue here for the egress?
For the egress, you could fit basically 3 before the dumpster and about another 3 or 4 in front of these 5 staff parking stalls. So you could fit about 7 or 8 cars stacking back. Our traffic study shows you'll have about a maximum of 2 at any one period of time. But again, we show that you could basically stack, like I said, 6 to 7 probably, and that's just for our driveway. If someone looks to egress onto gates, obviously that is the alternative means to egress the site.
And your traffic study shows you would only have 2 cars queuing to get back onto Morris at any given time in the hours between 7:30 and 8:30?
Yes.
That seems,
And again, that's based on the fact that not every vehicle is looking to make a left turn. A right turn car likely will, not have to queue as long as a left turn car, depending on what that first car wants to make at this intersection.
okay. And then maybe the city engineer can speak to this as well. I'd like to hear his thoughts, but so you're gonna have cars that have pulled into this drop off area behind the back of the car, and then they're gonna be pulling out, and there's gonna be some cars making the right into there, and then some cars making the left to go back out. And there's enough room for 2 cars to be doing that at the same time?
You're referring to at the driveway itself, or you're referring to?
I'm referring to the
internal?
back here.
Okay,
As
yeah.
cars are pulling in and out of the drop-off area, there's room for some cars to be coming in and making the right-hand turn into the lot, as well as cars coming out and making the left to go back out to Morris.
Yes, all our drive aisles are 24 feet in width that are 2-way, and our 1-way drive aisle is 22 feet at the area that you are concerned about, which I assume is this 3-way
Yes, that's
kind
the area I'm
of
concerned
combination. And again, 24 feet is what is typically designed within any 2-way drive aisle. But again, if the board engineer has an opinion, I don't want to, take his question and answer it myself. He could answer it as well if you want to address him.
Okay. I guess I don't have anything at this point. I'd like to hear what
Well, I guess if I could just follow up, Mr. Seckler, I guess is the 24-inch drive aisle consistent with any other parking lot, whether it be a commercial use or restaurant use as well?
Yeah, 24 is what we'd use for any kind of convenience store, high turnover area. That's wider than what you'd see in most parking decks. If you were in an office building with a parking deck, in fact, probably the downtown parking decks probably have a range of 22 to 24 feet in terms of width, and we're 24, which is typically what you see as the general design standard for any kind of high turnover area.
Okay, thank you.
Does Chris Dorr want to weigh in on that conversation? Chris, if you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would agree that the 24 feet is the standard. So that's 1-way, 22 feet is adequate, more than adequate.
Okay, all right.
And if my fellow board members don't mind, and on Beth Little's question, is making I'm not a traffic expert.
Lori, hang on one second. Beth, are you finished?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, sorry, I'm sorry, Matthew, go ahead.
No, and I'm sorry if I interrupted.
No.
Why would you allow a left turn? Is it possible that if you're pulling out, you have to make a right turn? Is that illogical, or does that not make sense?
Are you referring to at the driveway?
Yes, sir.
Again, actually, it's really the county's review. We're requesting that you can make either movement. If you can't make a left turn, then the concern becomes you're going to make it someplace else. Either you're going to go out to Gates Avenue and make the left, or you may have to kind of maneuver your way back around, through some neighborhood streets to go back to the west if that's your ultimate destination. Again, we've requested the county to review this as a full movement driveway so that, we could have basically 2 spots where left turns could be made onto Morris Avenue, both at our driveway and at Gates Avenue. But again, if the county or the board finds otherwise, we'd would obviously be in comply.
And Mr. Steckler, in the discussions with the county, it was being proposed as a full movement.
That is correct.
Okay, my apologies to my fellow board members for cutting in there. Thank you.
Oh, no, I just wanted to be sure. Mr. Formicelli has his hand raised.
Here. Hi, thanks, Bill. Matt, I got a sort of a two-part question for you on this. So assuming that you get some approval from the county to be able to make a left turn there, I mean, is there anything that either forces or encourages drivers to use that exit onto, directly onto Morris as the primary exit versus Gates? And then part two of that is, have you considered making the Gates exit only for, say, service or emergency vehicles, and otherwise sort of keeping it chained off during other hours?
Yeah, so I guess to answer both parts, nothing other than driver behavior. Typically like water, traffic finds its drivers find their even path. So if you have two options, usually people will lean on whatever one is the better of the two. I don't believe that there is anything, perhaps, and again, I haven't consulted the client necessarily on this, but perhaps at certain time periods, maybe we cone off the Gates Avenue driveway if that becomes of utmost concern of the residents or the board during the drop-off pickup times. We need to maintain it for the garbage vehicle, delivery vehicles, and obviously to utilize the parking for the staff in that area. But perhaps something could be worked out where, I see this all the time, whether it's at schools or events where, people put a couple cones down to kind of direct traffic during very specific time periods and then kind of keep it open during the off-peak time periods.
And I guess, Mr. Steckler, along with respect to that question, currently all of the traffic is directed towards Gate on the site.
Yeah, so in the existing condition, the office building that is remaining, all the traffic leaves via Gates. The office building that we are taking down, all the traffic enters and exits on Webster Avenue. So this is a property that has 3 driveways currently, or combined properties that have 3 driveways currently on residential streets. We're looking to close 2 and minimize the impact of minimize the one on Gates by having an alternative means to access Morris Avenue.
Understood, but that's not sort of drop-off traffic. That's sort of destination traffic, if you will. Right?
Understood. And again, if the board wishes, the neighbors wish, again, I think that we could consider, coning this off, if it's between 7 and 9 or something like that in the morning, to, eliminate the kind of egress onto Gates Avenue. Again, I see it at schools kind of all the time that they have a certain arrival, departure, traffic pattern, and then they have a general traffic pattern.
Any other members of the board with questions?
Thanks, Matt.
This witness?
I have a question, Bill.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes. Mr. Alvarez, yes, please go ahead.
I just had a question about the peak hour. In the new traffic study, it says 85 cars in the peak hour in the morning, and that's 74 parents approximately and 11 staff. And I think, but maybe I don't remember correctly, it's still 200 students. So that hasn't changed, correct?
Correct. Still 200 students. I think you go and ask.
I remember that you told us the last time, or perhaps the study said that it was 100 cars in the peak morning hour. Is that different, or am I remembering incorrectly?
I've given a lot of testimony. I don't remember what the 100 cars, but I think what I may have said is typically the threshold that you look at in terms of would something create a significant change in traffic flow is 100 cars in an hour. That typically is kind of the threshold of could that, is that worth studying to see if the intersection may change. That's what's sticking in my mind about 100 cars, but it's, I don't want to, again, all
right. So it's about 85 cars at the peak hour. And so that's 85 cars that are going to come in, drop off their children, except for the 11. So no, it's 75 cars that are going to come in, drop off their children and exit in 60 minutes.
Correct. Yes, that is correct.
Okay. I just wanted that on the record.
Any other members of the board with questions for this witness? If not, we can go to our board professionals. I have a little bit of a hard time. I've got a screen here and I'm scrolling through to see if anyone has any further questions.
Mr. Chairman, could I just ask our professional engineer to just opine on that right turn only?
I think the right turn only, it's, to me, it makes more sense so that you've got more of a flow of traffic going out. So you're not behind somebody that's trying to make a left into opposing traffic. Again, that may defer to the county. I guess my question would be is if the county were to turn down this full movement access for Morris Avenue, what is that the applicant would then have to come back to the board, I would assume.
I mean, I don't know who's coming first, whether it's the county decision or the
Right.
or the city's decision.
Right. So, I mean, that could be, it would be up to the board to make that a condition. Obviously, if the county does not approve that as a full movement access, then really all this discussion is kind of moot at this point. Making it a right out may be something more palatable to the county and to the board. That way, again, you're not holding up traffic leaving, especially if you're going to block off that exit onto Gates. That means everybody's going out onto Morris Avenue.
And so I hear you, you are recommending that we seriously consider that right turn. That it be a position that the board takes rather than waiting for the county to opine.
The county could then say, though, they may not want that, but I would say that would be more of a, that would allow more traffic flow out of the site and stop the queuing. It wouldn't be as long of a queue. As Matt mentioned, that the problem there is then you have people could be making a right turn on Gates and going through the neighborhood to turn around and go in the other direction. But it would eliminate the queuing backup on the site.
I think the other issue there is you're forcing them back out to Gates, and then people are going to be making left turns. They're going to left turn out of the driveway on Gates to Gates. They're going to go out to the intersection of Gates and Morris and then make the left turn.
Correct.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you, Mr.
Seems
Chair.
like there might be some unintended consequences of that.
Right.
If I don't have any other comments from board members, just one question from myself there. Mr. Seckler, can you tell us how many parking spaces there are in the two lots on the property right now?
Let me get that number for you. Hold on. It is. Behind the scenes, I'm pulling up my site plan, so I apologize for delay. It is 813. There are 23 on the building closest to, on the lot closest to Webster. And there are 2 and 6, 28, 34. 49. I think there's 44 on the one closest to Gates.
So somewhere around 75 plus or minus, something like that. No, sorry, 70s.
71 was the prior testimony.
71, something like that. Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
All right. So can we go to other members of the our professional team, maybe starting with Mr. Burgess? If any questions of this witness?
Yes, just two. Matt, the landscape plan, as everybody has acknowledged.
Joe, could you speak up a little bit? We're having a little hard time hearing you there.
Hold on one second. Let me.
Thank you.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah, great, thanks.
Okay. Matt, on the landscape plan, it looks very lush. Do you know what that actually depicts in terms of, is it set to show what's happening at planting height, or 3 years down the road, 5 years down the road?
We normally show it at like a 3 to 5 year. And again, from, you know, some of these plants, you know, when you're looking down on them from an aerial perspective, they'll still be generally the same dimensions that they, you know, grow a little more vertically that you wouldn't be able to capture. But generally, we depict a 3 to 5 year growth plan.
Okay. On the lighting plan, in your interior walkway, where you're asking for that one variance for light intensity, you're showing a 3.6 foot candle intensity. Now the code only permits 0.2. Could you describe for the board and the public how much more intense that is actually going to look in contrast to what's normally permitted?
Sure. Let me think of what a comparison of 3 foot candles are. But again, typically when you're in a public space, like a parking lot in a municipal building, you're typically looking at foot candles that range up to around 2 to 5 foot candles. So that's what we've typically designed in the interior walkways that will have some activity on, especially that we'll have children on it. 0.2 foot candles is nearly dark. I mean, it's less than the intensity of a candle, looking at a candle a foot away from your face, like a single candle.
Okay.
I'm trying to think of another comparison, but again, it is not unlike having a municipal parking area lit. This is not under a gas station canopy. That'll be in the range of 30 to 50 foot candles, to try to to give some comparisons. 3 foot candles is typically a kind of walkway. I imagine the streetscape, if you go downtown and you're under the the decorative lights in downtown, probably in that same range of like a 3 to 5 foot candle.
No, I appreciate that. I know in our memo, we pointed out what's proposed versus what the code says. And I wanted to make certain that everybody understood, what the range really meant. Okay, thank you. I have no other questions.
Mr. Chairman, I had a few more questions.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Dorr. I was on mute there. Please go ahead.
The directional sign that's proposed, what's the height of that and the setback from the sidewalk?
Certainly, and I'm going to pull it up so everyone could see it in all its glory. Okay, so the height of the sign, and I'm going to zoom in, and this is RE2 of Exhibit A15. The height as measured from grade is 2 feet at the middle point of the sign. As council mentioned, it's going to be a little less than 2 feet, a little more interior to the site, and a little more than 2 feet, a little towards the Morris Ave right of way, just because it's on a grade. So that height at its midpoint was meant to be 2 feet. In terms of its setback from the sidewalk, let me see if I could zoom in. 8.4, it's probably about 2.5 feet back from the sidewalk.
Okay, yeah, I just want to make sure there's not going to be any issue with visibility for people pulling out with pedestrians. So that answers that, and it's obviously not that high.
Yeah, it's low enough that if a toddler is walking here, it's probably the toddler is probably taller than the sign.
So with your testimony as far as the parking for employees, you mentioned 11 employees at I guess the drop-off time, which is the number of spaces that you have provided. When they start to ramp up the number of employees, which you said was around lunchtime, I believe, will they be allowed to use the drop-off parking spaces that are shown on the plan versus parking on the street?
Yeah, there's actually 15 parking spaces that are marked staff. There's the 3 here, 3 at the top, the 5 along the commercial boundary. And then there's near the end of this row of 11, there's a few staff that we've thrown in there. Yes, and the intention is that these drop off and pickup are only reserved during the typical drop off and pickup hours. So after 9 o'clock, they're open for anyone, and up until likely 4:30, they'll be open for anyone. And again, the staff would understand this, that they would be able to park in those spaces during that time. If we need to, when people sign up for the school, that would be obviously something that the parents would be notified at that point. Those are drop-off spaces between these hours and these hours, but that's the intention, to kind of have a shared parking arrangement between those two users.
And as far as the exit onto Gates, the width of that is really dictated by the type of the larger vehicles that are, and the emergency vehicles that will be coming in and out of there.
Yeah, it's 16 feet in width. At the driveway itself, I think we may have discussed at previous meetings is maybe try to angle the apron.
Right.
Somehow, again, it's a little difficult because of there's a sidewalk there, so you got to be ADA compliant. But we can do something with the kind of the flare of the apron, perhaps, to help encourage it. The left out only restriction.
Good idea. Yeah.
Right, and possibly even that arrow going out instead of it just going straight, that to make it a left arrow.
That's a great suggestion. I think that
It's not going to stop everybody, but and I think the only other comment I had was regarding the trash enclosure, and I think you've already provided testimony. I assume that I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the ordinance says that the enclosure has to match the building materials. So I assume you would defer to whatever is decided by either Mr. Linson or by Krista in the office as far as the materials. And and I think we also discussed the pickup, because now that you're going to be closer to the building next door, and based on the type of garbage that would be in there, that I would assume pickups would be as frequent as necessary.
Correct. That is correct.
Okay, and then the hours, I know the neighbors are concerned about the hours, and I assume that would be also, I think you also testified to that as well.
Correct. And again, we do not anticipate having trash pickups in the middle of the night. We actually prefer to have them either in middle of the day when there's not a lot of activity on the parking lot, or shortly after closing. That would be our time periods.
Great, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions.
Next, Mr. Warner, and then after Mr. Warner's comments, we want to go to a break to give Bridget a little bit of time off there. Short break, maybe 10 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
A few quick questions, Mr. Seckler. First of all, the traffic testimony you gave, is that all pursuant to your revised March 1, 2021 traffic impact study, for the record?
That is correct.
Thank you. And if I understood you correctly, you said that the Gates Avenue egress, I believe it was previously in the E range level of service. Was that correct?
I think I was referring to the Gates Morris intersection, not our driveway itself. And I don't think I was clear in my testimony, but it was the Gates Morris intersection that was at the E level of service, and it moves to a D level of service, which is
that was the part that was missing. I think you mentioned that there was a 20-second improvement, but we didn't hear whether or not that rendered a better grade than E, and I guess we went from an E to a D.
Correct.
On that intersection, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And the variances, while I hesitate to ask you to do so, there will be a resolution one day, I promise. Whether it's a grant or a denial, there's going to be a resolution memorializing the decision of this board. And that myself and Amanda are going to have to make sure we have all the variances listed, and all of them listed accurately with the magnitude of the deviation requested. So is that something you can give us quickly, so we have it, and we have it once accurately?
Certainly. I'm going to refer to Mr. Burgess's letter, because I think he had a different interpretation for
loading space.
No, for the
lighting,
fence and wall height, as he was taking it from grade of street, and we were taking it from grade of grade under the wall. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's page 3 of his memo. But while you reminded me, you had an interpretation of loading space as one not being required anymore because the office is no longer there and it's all daycare. And maybe that's a good question for Mr. Burgess, if he interprets our ordinance that way as well, i.e. no loading space required.
There is no loading space required, and we pointed that out in our memo.
Thank you, Mr. Burgess. One more down. Okay, why don't you give us that list?
Okay. So
Or you can
I'm
refer to his, and just tell us where you have it different.
okay. I'll refer to his, which starts at page 3.
Yep.
Number 1,
Yep.
the 5-foot buffer between properties. That's the easterly side. The minimum that we have is 3.3, which is an existing non-conforming condition where 5 is required.
Okay. Next one.
Next one is the minimum buffer area to residential zone. 36 feet is required. And we have at its smallest point 5 feet. Again, obviously, I know you're writing it down for resolution purposes. I would again just remind the board 5 feet is our minimum. We go up to 22 feet in that area. Next one is minimum, and Joe called it minimum freestanding sign setback. I was referring to it as minimum directional sign setback, but I think the requirements are the same. Where it is 25 feet from the curb is required and 20 feet from the side lot line is required. And we are 8.4 and 14.6 respectively.
Okay, so far, Mr. Burgess is perfect. Go ahead.
He always is. He always
There
is.
you go.
C is maximum fence height. Now we measured it above the, I guess the relative grade. And we have for the fence and wall height in front yard, we have it at 9.3 feet. I believe Joe has it as, maybe Joe has the same as me here. Hold on. Oh yeah, he is saying it's approximately 12 feet because of how much lower Webster Avenue is compared to the area where we were doing our measurements. So Joe had it at approximately 12 feet. I had it at 9.4.
Are you conceding Mr. Burgess is correct in the deviation magnitude?
I guess I just stated for the record, Joe Burgess is always correct. So I guess I'll have to be consistent.
You triangulated yourself. I didn't even have to do it. Why don't we go to the next one?
The next one, I'll agree with Mr. Burgess. We are having, he has it as 9.7 feet. I believe I have it at 9.4 feet. 9.3 feet is the next variance for the maximum fence wall height in front yard. Joe, I don't know if you had a specific location, but I thought we had checked what our maximum was 9.3 instead of 9.7.
I don't have the map in front of me.
For the sake of the record, let's defer to 9.7 and give ourselves constructability change if necessary. I don't think the 0.4 feet on that combination.
Next one's lighting for internal walkways.
Yes, and that is we have 3.63 foot candles in the walk area around the front door. And
versus 0.2 foot candles.
I'm sorry, could you just make sure you don't step on one another?
Sorry, why don't you keep going, Matt? I was rushing you.
Yep. Maximum lighting for internal walkways, 3.63 is required. 3.63 is proposed. 0.2 foot candles is permitted. And again, that's the area of the ramps and the steps coming out the front door, the rear door, which is our main entrance. And then the variance for maximum illumination at property lines. We are at 1.3 foot candles adjacent to the commercial property, lot 3, and 0.1 foot candles is permitted.
Okay, so those are the 7 variances. They're listed in Mr. Burgess's page 3 of his March 16, 2021. And you're conceding that all of those are necessary and the magnitude of the deviations are as he stated, correct?
Correct.
And do you require any other variances or site plan exceptions or design waivers?
I don't believe so, but of course, that's contingent on no further recommendations by the board at this time.
So at least at this stage, you're not asking for any others, correct?
Correct.
And are you arguing that all of those deviations should be granted under the C2 flexible C variance standard? Or are you also arguing a C1 undue hardship basis for any or all of the above?
I would say C2 would apply to all of those. There could be some C1 as it relates to some of the grading issues related to Webster Avenue and trying to meet the existing finished floor of the building that is remaining, but I think I've put on the proper proofs for the C2 consideration.
But I want to make it clear, if you're arguing a C1 basis for any of them, you'll need to let us know what they are. You're the planner.
I'll stick to C2. I think the
Okay,
case
so
is
it's
strong enough.
C2 only, and the applicant stipulating that they're not arguing a C1 as to any of the deviations, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the indulgence. I have nothing further.
Thanks. All right. So let's, before we go to public comment, let me ask Mr. Giannetti, do you have any more witnesses this evening, Mr. Giannetti? Or are we getting close to going to public questions? Questions from the public?
Yeah, I have no further witnesses to present this evening. I do have witnesses available in case there's any questions from the board.
Okay, so let's go take a 10-minute break. It's now, I got 9:29, 9:30. Let's reconvene at 9:40. All right. Thanks, everyone. Bridget, how are we doing?
Hmm?
How are you
I'm
doing?
still with you right now.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, we're coming back to life here. Okay. Okay. And just a few more. Jennifer coming back soon. Right. Hello there. And Chris, I guess we need to do another roll call to be sure everybody's here.
Correct. And is Steve here? Yeah, he is. Okay. Chairman Anderson,
Present.
Vice Chairman Brinkeroff,
Here.
Councilmember Little,
Here.
Ms. Paulson Alvarez,
Here.
yeah,
Here.
Mr. Dory,
Here.
Mr. Zucker,
Here.
Varela,
Here.
Mr. Fiore,
Here.
Mr. Formicelli,
Paul is maybe on mute. I see his picture.
yeah, he might not be back yet. And then Mr. Ashman,
Present.
Yep, there it is. Good. Hi, Bob.
Mr. Warner is here, and you do have a quorum. And if you want to wait for Paul, you can.
We'll give him a few seconds. In the meantime, Mr. Warner, I know you'll want to instruct us as to how to proceed in the next section here. We may have some attorneys representing members of the public, and they may have some consultants or others as well. And I know you wanted to kind of sort that out before we start hearing from the public.
Yeah, well, Mr. Chairman, my recollection is that we didn't have any attorneys representing anyone other than themselves, so that all members of the public can question the applicant's witnesses. So no limitation there. And certainly when we get to the point of public comment, it's my understanding that there may be one or more experts who intend to testify in support of members of the public, i.e. neighboring objectors. So certainly if that's going to be the case, the public on the public comment portion may wish to start with you, Mr. Chairman, may wish to have them start with the expert testimony before proceeding to fact testimony by individual members of the public.
Okay, great. That was helpful, Mr. Warner. Thanks. All right, so members of the public, Chris, who would like to have questions for this witness, Mr. Seckler.
And if we could just let the record reflect that Mr. Formicelli is back. I apologize, Chris, you were probably just going to say that.
Steve, it's all good.
All right, thank you. We're a team. Thanks, Chris.
All right, and Matthew Cohout is first.
Okay. So hi, Mr. Cohout. Just so that everyone, all the members of the public know, we're really asking questions of this particular witness. It's not really time for public comment. That will follow right after that. But so this is questions about this witness's testimony. And I'd also like to remind other members of the public, if you could, please, if someone who preceded you asked a question that was basically the same as yours, if you could not ask the question again, that would be helpful just to keep the process moving forward and to keep it efficient. Thank you. Mr. Cohout, go ahead. Welcome.
Good evening. Thank you again for all your time. Now you guys must be getting frustrated with this.
Just give us your address, please, Mr. Cohout.
It's Matthew Cohout, 9 Gates Avenue.
Thank you. Please proceed with your questions.
Thanks.
And if we can have the audience members spell their full names, please, for the record.
Kohaut.
Thank you.
Great.
As far as the no right turn onto Gates, I think that's great. It's going to be helpful. But if someone is going to want to go in that direction on Gates, what's going to prevent them from making a right onto Morris and a right back onto Gates? Is that a question that can be answered, or?
Sorry, I was unmuted. I was muted. Sorry. There would be nothing that would prevent them from doing so. I guess if you were a resident and you lived down Gates Avenue or to one of the surrounding streets, that would be your means of getting there. But there'd be nothing that prevent people from using public streets to make, any legal turns.
Correct. And just so you know, it's not only the streets within Gates, but it's also a way that people get to Kent Place, the other much larger section of town. They go that way because it's a lot easier than going up Morris Avenue to Kent Place. So that's a big concern. Also, you say you have 2 cars in the queue on Gates Avenue at any one time, correct?
That is what we've analyzed for this intersection. Again, we've had this project solely during COVID. We did traffic counts. We adjusted them based on counts of the that were previously collected over the last decade of time along Morris Avenue to try to get a typical commuting day to get Gates Avenue. I know there are times where the queuing could stack up 3 or 4 cars and then kind of releases out. We're trying to capture what would be, I guess, a typical queuing condition, not necessarily the worst of the worst condition along Gates Avenue.
Okay, so when you're referring to the queuing condition, you're stating that that's over all the traffic, not just additional cars from your location?
Correct, yes.
Wow. I have a very difficult time believing that because I've lived here for 24 years and I can leave here at any given time of the day and there's potentially 2 to 3 cars there. Another thing, from the people that again, as I was mentioning, people coming from the Kent Place Road, which is, I don't know if you studied that road in your traffic, but it's, quite a busy road and a lot of traffic, a lot of vehicles come from Kent Place down Gates Avenue already. Any people coming to your location from that area, there's a good shot that they are going to come down Gates Avenue or come down Webster. And again, that's going to add more cars to that queue. Not as much if they are on Webster, but that's still more cars than they have now. Did you take that into consideration?
So I would anticipate if someone was coming from the Kent Place, I guess, west area, that they would likely utilize Webster Avenue, as it would require a right turn from Webster onto Morris and then a right turn to the site, which was likely easier than a left turn from Gates onto Morris and then a left turn into the site. Again, we are a permitted use at this location, which means that the traffic that were generated was anticipated when they allowed daycares within the zone. We're trying to make sure that the access points operate as properly as possible. We're not here to fix traffic. I mean, obviously there are existing traffic conditions along Morris Avenue and the intersecting streets. That's, I'm not contending that in any way.
And the vehicles making the right out of the lot now onto Morris Avenue are potentially going to affect the vehicles trying to pull out of Gates Avenue, correct?
you're saying if someone leaves our site via Morris Avenue, that would be
Correct.
driving, that they would have to drive by Gates Avenue, correct?
Correct. So they're adding to that potential queue. I don't know if whether I asking you this or not. I don't know whether you talked about this or not, but snow removal, is that a question that I can address to you, or is that?
Oh, absolutely. Sure. Go ahead.
So I have a big concern with the fact that, and I believe the testimony prior was they would remove the snow from the site.
Yes.
Is there a way we can control what hours they do that? Because that's going to be a major project, removing all that snow. Because not only are they going to have to remove the snow from walkways and the driveway, I'm pretty sure they're going to want to remove it from the playgrounds also. And in addition, I believe they're going to have to remove it from some areas of the playground because it's going to be an egress for the building in case of a fire or in case of an emergency, if I'm not mistaken.
So we are, and we did agree that we would remove snow, obviously a substantial snowstorm. If it's just a dusting, it'll probably just be
Right. I'm not
left on
right.
site. But yes, we would remove the snow. Again, the time that we would do so, I think is somewhat contingent on when the snow falls. Obviously if it's a daytime snowstorm, they're going to want to remove it during the day so that the parents, when they return to the site to pick up their children, that the snow will be removed. The play area, I think doesn't necessarily get removed right away. Obviously, if it's cold enough to snow, you're probably not sending the kids out to the playground that day or that day. So I think we do have some availability to time the removal of snow on the playground. But obviously, I would say the parking field is more contingent on when the snow falls in terms of making sure that the site is safe and accessible for the users of the site.
I'll say, okay, so ultimately my question is there a way to prevent the removal of snow, which is potentially, removing snow from that site is potentially going to take, if it snows 6 inches, that's potentially a 2-hour or more job with machines that every time they back up, they have backup alarms. And that's going to be quite a production. Is there a way we can eliminate certain times in the late evening and early morning hours that they cannot do that?
Well, I mean, Mr. Sheckler, I don't know if you can address it from a planning or traffic standpoint. And I don't know if the town has any requirements, obviously any requirements the town has with respect to snow removal or those type of noise issues, because we'd be subject to the noise requirements. Those might be exempt from it. I'm not sure. But I mean, any commercial use here would have some sort of snow removal, whether it was the daycare, whether it was the office, whether it was a restaurant, whether it was the dance studio, or any other series of permitted commercial uses would have some sort of snow removal, some of which I would believe could occur at night, just like how they do on the roads. If the board has any experience on limitations, we're welcome to listen and consider that.
Mr. Burgess, is that something you've encountered along the way?
I don't recall that this board has encountered it. I've seen some resolutions limit the time. The backup beeping issue, there's nothing you can do about that. In terms of time, I have seen some resolutions limit late night hours. but not that many. And I'm not sure about the legality of it. I would defer to the attorney on that one.
Well, yeah, and then Mr. Warner can, I'm sure, comment as well. But again, the planning board is determining whether or not we comply with the town's site plan ordinance. And we're not necessarily getting into any kind of use issues. Obviously, there's variances we're seeking with respect to fence, in the wall, and some of the existing buffer conditions on the property. But unless there was some sort of operational or use issue or relief we're seeking where it would trigger that kind of condition, I could see a board placing a condition, but just saying, adding a requirement that doesn't otherwise exist in the town's ordinance, I have not seen.
Mr. Warner, any thoughts on that?
Well, the applicant's not stipulating to it candidly. I do this in quite a few municipalities, have been doing it for a lot longer than I look age-wise, hopefully. Very rarely, if ever, have I even seen that in resolutions for snow removal. Any applicant, anyone in the township is subject to our noise ordinance, which is, as we well know now, fully compliant and mirrors the state requirement at 7:29 of the New Jersey Administrative Code, which is no one can exceed 50 dBA at night or 65 dBA during the day. And if they do so, they've violated our noise ordinance and the state noise requirement through the state regulations. But otherwise, unless the applicant wants to stipulate to it, the board might be somewhat hard pressed to impose it because you'd have to find a nexus to the variance relief sought. And I'll leave that to Mr. Burgess as to whether he can come up with one, how the snow removal would directly relate to the setback of a 2 square foot directional sign.
Yeah, and I hope the board has at least seen that the anytime the applicant can accommodate either a board or a member of the public's request, we're willing to do it. I guess my only concern is if we place some restriction that just limits our ability to remove snow from the site, which could impede operations of the site. And that's just my hesitancy of agreeing to saying we're not going to remove snow from 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. and there's a major snowstorm at 11 p.m. that doesn't end until 3 a.m. or something like that. That's my only concern in not wanting to stipulate to a specific time because there's going to be a need for snow removal.
And not to belabor the point, but there could be a safety issue and there could be an insurance liability issue as well.
Yeah.
So, I'm
Facility
sorry,
has to
Mr.
be open the following day by 6:30 a.m. to receive children, right?
We've probably taken this one as far as it can go.
All right, so
All right.
Mr. Lord, I don't think that's going to be addressed at this point.
Okay. And I just will, on the final note on that, just comment that this is not a typical snow removal. If you're taking all the snow off the site, it's a lot more. And, that's due to the way they've developed their site. The last thing that I will request is how do I get compliance with maintaining the fence that they plan on putting up? Is that something that I would go through? How do I make sure? I mean, they've testified themselves that the fence there now is in disrepair. Well, that's not my choice. I wish that fence wasn't in disrepair, but I don't know how to go about getting them to fix the fence. It's not my fence.
If I can, real quick, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Carton, for all members of the public, all compliance conditions will be set forth in a resolution if there's an approval. And this particular resolution is going to be recorded in the chain of title, so any subsequent purchaser is going to take it with the knowledge of that requirement. The city ensures all compliance post-approval, and there are a number of mechanisms, not the least of which is a phone call to the city by a neighbor who observes something that is not in compliance with a resolution of approval, such as the fence, and a call by someone such as yourself. So that's always available.
I would also just offer, there is a report of concern on the city website, and it would be a code enforcement issue that would then be looked into by the code enforcement officer.
Receive. Thank you very
And
much.
that would result in an actual ticket, so there would then be a record. That's what I would suggest.
Thank you for all your time.
Thank you, Mr. Cohart. I appreciate it. Mr. Nicola, next.
And next is Stephen Forbes.
Good evening,
How we
Mr.
doing?
Cohart. Can you just state your name and address again and have questions for this witness?
Yes, I do. So Stephen Forbes, 28 Montrose Ave in Summit, New Jersey.
Good, welcome.
Thank you. And maybe just, I just want to personally thank the board for all the concerns you have raised about, the reality of the situation as it pertains to traffic, and without debating it, right? I think we all live it here every day in Summit, and so appreciate the willingness of the board to raise some of those concerns throughout this whole process. So maybe with that, as I think about, walking across Morris Ave with my children on a daily basis, and the migration down to the Lakeland Bank, I'm curious if this project requires the installation of crosswalks, traffic lights, as we think about, just the safety of children going to and from Primrose and in the various schools in the neighborhood. So I don't know if, it obviously impacts traffic. So would love to hear if Mr. Seckler's thoughts on that, and then also where, I guess, what drove the conclusion at Lakeland Bank, if that crosswalk and light was added during the construction project there, or it was added because of the school, and how that impacts the site here?
So again, I wasn't around for the Lakeland Bank / school traffic signal. So Morris Ave is a county roadway. So they have ultimate jurisdiction of any type of traffic control devices on that roadway. That includes, I'd call active devices, meaning traffic signals, flashers, things of that nature, or more passive items such as crosswalks, either along the roadway or across the roadway. So I assume that, as it relates to Washington School, that intersection was deemed the most appropriate one to have a traffic signal at. There's also certain federal requirements that you need to meet before getting a traffic signal. It's called a warrant analysis. And one of those warrants relates to pedestrian crossings and vehicle volumes and things of that nature. So I assume the county or a developer or the school district perform those warrants, deem that a traffic signal was acceptable there. The county agreed that a traffic signal is, suitable there, and then somehow it got put into place. So unfortunately, I don't know the history of that location specifically, but I do know that our application is being reviewed by the county, who has the jurisdiction over Morris Avenue. Certain requirements related to sidewalk replacement, the type of driveway, the way the driveway is constructed so it could support the vehicle traffic flow back and forth on it. All that is under their review, and that's their jurisdiction.
So without a deeper understanding of the whole process, is the applicant submitting some sort of request for crosswalks? Because there are no crosswalks right at Gates and Morris or anywhere near the property. Are you referring to across Morris? Because there are crosswalks along Morris at Gates and Webster. Is your request across? Yeah, correct. Okay. Well, unless all the traffic is just going to originate from our area here in Gates, Morris, Montrose, which I don't think was the expectation, right? As you stated. Yeah, again, I don't have, at this point, we hadn't requested any specific crosswalks across Morris Avenue. If the board and their professionals believe that there's a specific location that a crosswalk across Morris makes sense, that's obviously something we could include in our correspondence with the county. We could include your board engineer on that correspondence to ensure that that's made. But obviously, we can't guarantee a specific crosswalk because we're not the party that gets to
judge that if it's a suitable location.
Okay, I'll leave that point there, but obviously, as we think about the safety here and the safety of your children, right, at these schools for these applicants, it seems like there's an inefficiency here, right, as you think about just the traffic flow on Morris. We deal with it on a daily basis. My second question, and maybe this is just a clarifying question, because I haven't listened to everything. This has been a very long, drawn out process, but as I think about Mr. Seckler's presentation here, is it supposed to be unbiased or not? Like how are these witness processes supposed to work? And maybe this is a question for the chairman, because I hear no concerns, right? It's all, it's all positive conclusions, right, about the whole process. So it almost seems very biased to me. So I'm not sure how these processes work, but or maybe if I can ask a question, Mr. Seckler, what are your concerns as you think about coming about this from more unbiased expert point of view?
I guess, do you want to ask the council, your board council, that first question, and then I'll answer the second question, I guess?
I'd rather just hear I think the second is fine, as you think about like what concerns you about the traffic flows, given your analysis and since you're the expert here.
I don't have concerns with our specific traffic flows in terms of the traffic generated by our site. I think that this board, the public, even my experience on Morris Avenue, understands that this is an area that has a significant amount of traffic flow, especially during the times of school arrival and dismissal, because of the sheer number of schools in the area. I don't necessarily have a concern with that. I mean, I don't necessarily believe that traffic volume creates inherent safety issue. It just causes more delay on roadways, longer time to make certain turns, things of that nature. So I don't have any, again, specific concerns, but I am aware, and I, consider the high volume on Morris Avenue as a background condition to this project.
So maybe Mr. Forbes, maybe I can answer that question just a little bit more fully from our perspective. The applicant makes an application for the variances that they wish to have. They come and present that to the board, and the city staff reviews the application. As you probably heard tonight, we have a city forester, we have a historic preservation, we have building department, we have all aspects of the fire department, all aspects of the city structure and departments look at this application as it goes through and make comments on that. And we as board members get those comments in advance along with the materials applied for that the applicant has provided. And so we then have outside consultants, a planning consultant, engineering consultant, and others in obviously our board attorney that look at that material too. So that when that presentation is made, as it's been tonight, what happens then is we, as board members, get to ask questions of the applicant. Then we have our board professionals ask questions of the applicant and their professionals and their consultants. And then we allow the public to do that. So it's that exchange back and forth between the dynamic of who's presenting and who's asking questions. And that process is designed essentially to ferret out both sides of the story. And I hope that helps to answer your question a little bit.
No, I mean, it helps. And I guess maybe I'm just naturally more concerned about the safety of kids in the area because, and that was the whole comment around the crosswalks and so forth, because it's challenging, right? And it's not easy to make a left turn onto Morris. There's cars parked on both sides of the street. Traffic volumes do impede safety. I don't understand that comment by any means, but obviously that's more my unexpert opinion. Maybe the last one for me, before I turn over the floor to someone else, is just a question of a confirmation question for Mr. Seckler. I believe it was the last meeting, which I can't remember when it was, maybe January or something, where you said that you thought the original enrollment for the school and most of the traffic would originate from neighboring towns. So a two-parter on that. Is that still the conclusion that you expect the initial enrollment and traffic to originate from neighboring towns? And if so, right, how did that impact the breadth and depth of the studies that you went about, right, to develop your opinion? Because it's sort of, as I think about, breadth and depth of a traffic study, neighboring towns, are really coming from all directions. And so we'd love to just hear your thought process on how you sort of narrowed it down to such a minute number of streets.
Certainly. And again, I think my testimony was related to the majority of people that there's two types of users of a daycare facility, either the immediate neighborhood, the joining blocks. They're the ones who live in Summit and may find this to be the daycare that suits their needs, whether it's the program, the hours, the cost, and that's what they decide. Or because Summit does have a significant amount of people that work within the city, that people may come from neighboring towns that work in Summit and utilize this daycare because it's near their place of employment. That's usually the two choices people make is, do I get daycare near my house? Do I get daycare near my place of employment? In terms of the limits of our traffic study, is we are here before this board seeking approval for a planning board application. And there was some discussion previously about specific case law as it relates to the powers for planning board to judge the impacts of offsite traffic. And I'm not going to litigate or discuss the specific case law. That's probably more left for some of the attorneys or even the board planner to discuss. But our obligation, in my belief, for an application with the variances that we're seeking is to ensure proper site circulation, proper driveway safety, and not necessarily having to deal with the off-site traffic impacts, multiple intersections down on the road. So what we studied initially was our driveways. Then we were asked to study the Gates Avenue and Morris Avenue intersection, and we studied that intersection as well, because that intersection, again, does somewhat relate to our property, especially when all our egress traffic at the time was going out to Gates Avenue. So that is it from, I'd say, a legal standpoint. Is I don't believe our obligation seeking a permitted use for the variances that we're asking for requires us to study other intersections. From a traffic engineering standpoint, the threshold is normally 100 new cars is a threshold for you needing to study a specific intersection. That's typically what's utilized by the county, by the state, by a lot of jurisdictions. Is you need to study every intersection that 100 new cars drives by because of your development. And we don't have that outside of the Gates Avenue intersection. So from a planning standpoint and from a traffic engineering standpoint, that's how I came up with our kind of study area.
And that's 100 new cars weekly, daily, monthly?
Hourly.
Hourly. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So I guess with that said, I mean, I get the legality of it, but I mean, I guess in your expert opinion, was your study complete? I mean, it feels like it, is very, fine-tuned, right, to fit the legality of the situation. And maybe I'm misunderstanding the process here, but do you believe your study was complete and fair?
I do. And again, going back to one of your earlier questions, this board has their own traffic engineer who provides guidance to the board. The board was deemed complete by the professionals that deem applications complete. And we also, again, have a county planning board application. So they have their own experts that need to evaluate whether the report and the study was complete from their standpoint. I don't believe that any party that has reviewed our application has deemed it incomplete for that reason.
And apologies, one last one, it's a quick one. As I think about your comment there that enrollment usually potentially is from a place of work, we're close to a place of work. Is there a relationship with Bristol Myers Squibb, or has that been established already? Is that where enrollment's coming from, or where's the relationship between the two brands?
I don't believe there's any relationship between Bristol Myers Squibb other than that they're obviously a potential employer in the area, but I don't believe there's any formal relationship between the two.
Thank you. And again, thank you to the board for all the concerns that you raised. It's nice to hear that there's some concern about the safety here, and you guys certainly expressed it. So thank you.
Mr. Forbes, thank you. All right, Chris, do we have another?
Next is Michael Innes.
Okay. So there is. Good evening, Mr. Innes. How are you?
Good evening. How are you? Thank you. Thanks for taking my
Again,
questions.
mind just stating your name, spell your last name, and give us your address, and have any questions for this witness, Mr. Seckler.
Sure. My name is Michael Innes, Innes. I'm at 23 Webster Avenue.
So welcome tonight. Thank you.
Thanks. So, Mr. Seckler, did you do any pedestrian traffic studies of the neighborhood?
We studied the pedestrians that were crossing the intersections that we studied. That would be the Morris Avenue driveway, the Gates Avenue driveway, and the intersection of Gates and Morris.
Okay. So you didn't do any studies about foot traffic on Gates Avenue, other than in front of that intersection?
Correct.
You didn't do any on Webster Avenue either?
Correct.
Or Montrose?
Correct.
Or Lafayette?
Correct.
Do you have any understanding how many children commute from that neighborhood, those streets, to Washington School?
I've driven through the area during morning school period, so I am aware that there are children. I don't have a quantity. I don't have a quantity number, but I am aware of that.
Okay, but the answer is no. You don't know how many children walk across.
No, I didn't do a specific count. No.
Okay. Let me ask you this: on the new egress onto Gates, have you considered angling that that driveway such that it essentially forces someone to make a left?
The board engineer mentioned such a design, which we could try to accommodate to the best of our ability. The concern we have is that most of the times when you construct an island type design, it in a apron style driveway, which is the type of driveway this is, it will result in a non-compliant ADA path for the sidewalk. But we will, and we're willing to work with the board engineer to do whatever we can to angle, to keep a raised curb on maybe the right side of the driveway to help enforce that as best we can.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I need to draw a picture for you, but I'm thinking it's not an island. It's literally like a curved driveway, right? Does that make sense?
Yes, with the, again, there are certain aspects. If this was not an apron driveway, meaning that the sidewalk didn't continue across it, it would be a little bit easier to do, but there are some curbing that can be done to help enforce that. Yes. We could angle the end curbing, in a left direction to help enforce that movement.
See that?
I think you may have to create an exhibit name for that, just for the record. If you or I want to refer to it.
Exhibit 1. Do you see that?
No, it won't be, Mr. Innes, but it can be O1, because I don't think we have any objector exhibits yet. Do we, Chris?
This would be O2, Mr.
O2, we do have one from where, okay. You got O2, Mr. Innes, and that's a drawing you contemporaneously made, I expect, correct?
Yeah. We would need that for the record too, right, Steve?
Yep. Nope, we got it. Yeah, Mr. Innes, you have no problem providing Mr. Nicola a copy of that?
Sure. Yeah. No
That's
problem.
great. And you had a question with that? Is your question, would something like this work, Mr. Seckler?
Yeah. So, Mr. Innes, there is something I would say like that. That could work, although not exactly that. That would work on what's considered a radial driveway, or a driveway where the crosswalk, where the grade of the driveway is at the grade of the road. In this case, the grade of the driveway is at the grade of the sidewalk, so it's a slight difference, but there's something similar, I guess I could say, that we could design.
Okay. Would you support, and maybe I missed this, I'm sorry, I dropped off for a little bit, but would you support or would the applicant support an ordinance, a city ordinance that made it a moving violation to make a right-hand turn onto Gates?
We would agree to Title 39, which would allow for police enforcement, and whatever the governing body wishes to do beyond that, I think would be, we would have no issue with. But Title 39 would make it a regulatory offense. Again, Mr. Warner probably could speak to that as well.
No, that's correct, and I'm sure the board appreciates the stipulation. It's generally required in any site plan application with the significant parking, ingress, egress.
Yeah, I would just, and this is just tangential to that, but I'd request that the board make that up. If they do approve this, you make that application to the mayor and city council. I think that's all. I think that's all the questions I have. I mean, it's, and Mr. Forbes and I are aligned on the pedestrian traffic in the neighborhood, and I mean, I think it speaks volumes that you decided not to do a pedestrian traffic study in the surrounding neighborhood, but unfortunately you didn't. So thanks for your time.
Mr. Chairman, next question, next member of the public?
Yeah, sorry, I was on
Chris?
mute there. Yeah, Mr.
Oh, okay.
Villa. Yep.
All right, next is Elliot Fishman.
Okay, am I here?
Good evening, Mr. How are you? Could
Hey,
you
everyone.
do us a favor, please state your name and spell it and give us your address?
Sure, Elliot Fishman, that's Fishman, 34 Webster Avenue.
Great. Good evening, Mr. Fishman. How are you this evening?
Good evening. I'd like to thank the board and everyone listening and the experts for all your time. You've been very patient with us. So I hope you don't mind if I ask some very technical questions. And this is not to display any technical prowess or anything, but I think it will lead to some information that will be informative to the board. So please bear with me for some technical questions of Mr. Seckler. Mr. Seckler, as the traffic expert, would you please confirm that you applied a Poisson distribution to estimate the number of parking spaces required so that the cars entering would not back up onto Morris Avenue?
So I'll answer that question in three parts, just because I think each part is important here. The required parking for this site is actually required by ordinance. So I don't make the required parking number. That's the city's stance. They have a calculation, and that requirement is 31 parking spaces. We also studied similar sites that Primrose had and just observed, just in general, on a couple days, determine what their maximum parking was. And we've done that on a number of sites, not just Primrose, but for this project, we just did Primrose. Then, so we had basically those two data points. One, it was the required number by ordinance, and that is really what this board's reviewing. We did the second one to look at similar sites. And the third one was an attempt to get an understanding of what the board's concern was what if there was a randomness beyond what we have observed at other Primrose sites. And so what we tried to do was apply the trip generation over an hour to determine the number of events during a specific period of time. So that was our attempt using the Poisson ratio, but by no means is the Poisson the sole determinant. And in fact, that was just an exercise we did to inform the board of some additional information. The true governing aspect of this application is the zoning ordinance, which is set at 31 for this project.
But isn't it true that the zoning ordinance is a minimum number? And if the circumstances or that is the output of the Poisson model requires more parking spaces, then it would be prudent for the traffic backup on Morris to add additional parking spaces as the model may reveal.
Again, the board's requirement is the ordinance. We looked at this site operationally, utilizing a study of similar sites and the Poisson so that we would feel comfortable. Now, none of this has to do with backing up necessarily the cars. This was related to the number of parking spaces that drop off and pickup would have happen simultaneously.
But then again, if you do have inadequate number of parking spaces, then you get gridlock and it would back up just intuitively.
And I would state that when we did our projected parking demand, the maximum parking demand actually occurs in the middle of the day from 11 a.m. to about 1 p.m. And then again, probably right around 3:30 to 4:15 So it doesn't necessarily coincide with the exact maximum of peak drop off and pickup, but that the drop off and pickup is one component to the parking demand.
So just to drill down on that a little further, what were the exact parameters of the Poisson model? You said 74 cars per hour, is that right?
That was the drop off and pickup, correct?
And what's the window for the parking? You said 10 minutes?
We used a 10-minute for that one.
Okay. Any other input parameters to that Poisson model that are relevant?
We attempted to follow a 95th percentile confidence interval.
Right. So just by way of background, and again, I don't mean to get too technical, but I think it will reveal something to people listening here. In general, what are the conditions for the proper application of a Poisson distribution? Are
you asking about the fact that it's a random event that
That's exactly where I'm going,
okay.
sir.
Yes.
Are these random event? Is it necessary to have a random and independent observation for the Poisson model to accurately apply or accurately model the parking situation?
I'm not sure if, can you repeat that question a different way?
Is it necessary to have a random and independent observation for proper application of a Poisson model? Otherwise, it's potentially would lead to erroneous results.
I guess there could be a level of, there could be a factor of, I don't want to call it erroneous, but there could be a factor of unreliability in that case.
Which is dictated by the volatility of the non-independence of that set. With that, I don't mean to get too detailed on the math, but so of this set of 74 cars per hour, are those actually independent observations, or are they members of a finite set which are not independent, and their appearance into the driveway is actually contingent upon the behavior of other members of the set? That's a mouthful, but I think you know where I'm going.
Can you describe it in this actual event so that
sure
it's easier for me and probably the board members to understand?
Yeah,
like use terms like parent or things like that. I think will make it easier for me to understand as well.
Yeah. All right. Look, if you got 74 cars in an hour, if one car enters, there's only 73 cars left in the set in that hour. And then if another 2 cars come in, there's only 71 cars left. So it's a finite set. It's not like raindrops falling on a roof. It's a finite set, and these are not independent observations. And I'm struggling with the validity of the application of a Poisson model, which requires independent observations when this finite and pretty small set doesn't appear independent at all.
And now, okay, and again, that is why I didn't sit here and say, let's do a Poisson ratio, and that's what we're going to end at. So again, we had this zoning ordinance, we had the other sites that we reviewed, and we went to the sites, we counted the number of parked cars at any one period of time. But you're right there. This is a set that, I guess, per the definition of utilizing a Poisson ratio, we might have overstepped utilizing this type of statistical analysis to determine the likelihood of simultaneous events occurring, like we did on this application. But I do feel from observing other applications, other sites, that we've never seen 13 cars drop off or pick up at any one time. The maximum we ever saw was 11, and that was an actual event that we saw out in the field.
Okay.
So again, I do feel comfortable with 13, but I do understand statistically we may have overstepped our bounds here.
And I appreciate your candor, sir. Thank you. So one more pretty technical question, and forgive me for being wonkish here. So you also did perform queuing analysis as part of your study. Is that correct, sir?
That is correct.
And I remember a couple meetings back in your queuing analysis, you did assume fixed gaps between cars or variable gaps?
So there's two things. Two things. When there are formulas within our software that utilize a calculation for a queue length. That is separate from the analysis that we do that relates to level of service and delay, which accounts for the gaps, the specific gaps in traffic. Now, what we would like to have done under normal conditions is do a gap study, which basically studies the random arrival of cars. It studies, some cars are 2 seconds apart, some cars are 15 seconds apart, and it basically studies that over time to come up with, are there acceptable gaps here? Unfortunately, this being during COVID that we've been involved in this project, we were forced to utilize the traffic volumes that were on the road historically that were not collected with that type of, I would say, precision of actual gaps. And our software typically utilizes a little more uniform approach to vehicular volumes on roadways. What that does is actually hurts hurts the analysis, because the way that cars utilize gaps is the longer the gap is, the more vehicles per gap you utilize. For instance, if you have a 15-second gap, you may be able to get 3 cars out in that time period, where if you have sequential 6-second gaps, you may only be able to get 2 cars out in that, in those smaller gap times. I don't know if that makes sense, but basically the follow-up gap is shorter. So if after the first car goes to turn right or left at a stop sign, the second car will actually accept a lesser gap. So having long gaps, some few very long gaps is more advantageous to having a lot of short gaps.
I understand. So your software does or does not permit you to input variable gaps?
The software, there are techniques we could utilize to input variable, the actual gaps that are studied, but because we're utilizing historic data, it didn't have that. We didn't have that capability. We didn't have the video. We didn't have drone video. We didn't have things that allowed us to calibrate to that type of gap analysis.
So just to wrap up, in terms of variable gaps, were you aware of the backup on Butler Parkway about a month ago when there was a water main break on River Road?
I was not in the area about a month ago, so I can't state
Right,
one
so
way. And we also didn't study that time period. So
Sure. Well, it provides an interesting analogy, because a lot of cars were trying to get off of Butler onto Morris. They were backed up about 100 cars all the way on Butler Parkway, and it was a very slow pullout. And I hope if the board asks you to do an additional traffic study, you'll take a look at some of those videos, and because I think it's a good analogy about that half-hour backup on Butler Parkway, cars trying to pull out on Morris. But I want to thank you for your time and your candor about these models, and I thank the board for having us talk.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Fishman. Have a good evening.
You too.
All right, Mr. Nicola, anyone else on the public have questions of this witness?
Yeah, Cameron is next, no last name.
Hi, Cameron, is that your first name, I guess? Oops, you're on mute. Cameron, you're on mute. There you go.
I'm so sorry.
That's no problem. Could you give us your full name and address and spell your last name? Thanks.
Yep.
Good to see you tonight. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. First name's Cameron, last name Evans. That's Evans. And I live at 30 Webster Avenue in Summit.
Great, thanks. And you have questions?
Okay, what are your questions?
Questions for
Yes,
Mr.
so the question is for Mr. Seckler. So kind of dovetails a little bit into Mr. Ford's, Mr. Ennis's question, which was the pedestrian traffic study done? So the question is, do we know why a pedestrian study wasn't done?
I mean, so from my standpoint, we studied the intersections that would be most relevant to this application in terms of vehicular flow. I think, as you've heard, the applicant is willing and able to restrict the right turn out onto Gates Avenue, meaning that, and we've been able to create the in and out driveway along Morris Avenue, which would significantly reduce, if not eliminate, any of the vehicular traffic from this site utilizing, I guess, the Montrose Avenue and that general area flow of pedestrian traffic.
Okay. So I believe you indicated that, like water, traffic tries to sort of find the path of least resistance. So, kind of speaking anecdotally from what I kind of see as far as just traffic pattern, for folks that are driving to the southeastern part of Summit, towards the dump, often using Webster Avenue as a way of getting to Kent Place and other side streets that are neighboring this. Would you agree that traffic pattern would still be directed through Webster Avenue and other side streets, where pedestrians often walk to schools that neighbor this immediate area?
I mean, I think the vast majority of the traffic from this site would be utilizing Morris Avenue. Again, we can't regulate vehicles once they enter the public roadway network from making any other legal turns. Again, I think what's important, and again, maybe more so for the board, since they're the one who's going to make the eventual vote on this application, is that, again, we are permitted use. The traffic generated from a site like this is anticipated as part of the zoning ordinance, as part of what the governing body has allowed for developments within the B district. So again, we've tried to rework this site plan and try to encourage the traffic to utilize Morris Avenue. We've tried to prohibit as much as we can the traffic from utilizing Gates Avenue, but as a permitted use, once vehicles enter the roadway network, they're permitted to make the movements that they wish. And again, this being a permitted use, I don't know what the applicant's responsibility is. I mean, I believe I know what the applicant's responsibility is from a legal standpoint, beyond our site driveways in terms of traffic impacts.
Right. So, I mean, I can understand that, right? But at the same time, speaking from a legal requirement of what, you've studied versus probably what's going to be more of a real world, sort of downstream impact to the neighborhoods, most notably, again, Webster, Gates, Montrose, Butler Parkway is another one, feeding up from the north side, which is an intersection that butts directly up against that property. While I understand that you're constrained, your legal requirements to stick to 100 cars, I think kind of the spirit of this meeting is to discuss and kind of, maybe look at how that might impact, sort of quality of life and safety impact to the neighboring, to neighborhoods. So I guess the question is, does it not make sense to at least consider that as part of, the overall impact?
And again, I think that we've considered it as much as an applicant can when they are responsible for their frontage and property. We've agreed to enforce through ordinance a no right turn restriction at Gates Avenue. We've agreed to work with the board engineer to make as much of a physical obstruction as possible to Gates Avenue. We've redesigned the site to permit in and out movement on Morris Avenue, again, to help move traffic away. Again, we don't control the right of ways along Gates Avenue. We don't control the right of ways along Webster Avenue. And there's a limit in terms of what a applicant, even if this wasn't a permitted use, can do in terms of changing traffic patterns for neighborhoods.
I mean, I can understand that you can't control generally what a driver is going to do, whether or not they're going to continue to drive all the way down Kent Place and then stop at the stop light and then make a left onto Morris, and then continue down Morris to make a left into the property, right? Which is probably the more unlikely scenario of someone driving from the southeastern part of town, or consequently from the north side of town, driving up and making a left up onto Morris and then driving all the way up versus cutting through Butler.
And again, those issues seem a lot more for governing body, city officials, those type of entities than an applicant for permitted use in a B zone.
Right. And I think the thing is too, was any part of this considered as part of an aggregate impact as to the development of BMY? Also the senior care facility that was just built at the end of Morris, and then also the high concentration of schools that happen to be in this area as well. So I think what we're looking at this isn't from a finite point, right? Which is that, we're just simply looking at how Primrose is going to impact this. But I think from an aggregate standpoint, I'm just surprised. And I guess my question is, why wasn't, because at least as far as I can tell from, what's been discussed so far, that I don't know that this is, being considered. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, I think what we're thinking about and what we're factoring in from the individuals that live here, that's what we're concerned about.
And again, I don't know, was there a specific question? I don't mean to be.
Well, I guess my question is, was this project considered an aggregate with the other development that's going on in this area?
So our traffic study accounted for other developments. I think one of them may be the Bristol Myers Squibb Celgene development. So the traffic from that development was accounted for in our traffic study. But in terms of kind of the type of development or the location of development, that is again through your governing body. And that's who sets what roads and what properties allow certain uses. So again, the governing body has designated this stretch of Mars Avenue to be a B zone. B zones are business zones. Business zones, by their definition and specifically within your ordinance, basically speaks to having, kind of a daily type use or a frequent trip type user. So again, whether there's a disconnect between what the residents want or the residents feels appropriate here and the zoning ordinance, I mean, it sounds like that might be the case, but as a applicant, we're not the ones who decide, why the governing body picked this to be a B zone. And we're not the one who decides, the overall development patterns up and down the corridor. We look within the rule book, which is the development regulations. And it says that this is the type of site that Summit believes can support a daycare, along with other uses.
Yeah, and the question is, I guess, basically in short, is that's just based off of Morris Avenue only, correct?
Well, the zone is for a property, so it's basically the blocks and lots that are associated with this. So this is the entire lot is within the B zone. So the Gates Avenue, technically, I guess if you want to look at it from a street standpoint, Gates Avenue from our driveway to Morris Avenue would also be considered kind of a B zone roadway. The realtor across the street is in the B zone. So same thing across Webster. The Midas shop is in the B zone. So again, I would say that our entire property and our frontages would be within the B zone.
I think we've established that pretty clearly. Anything else you'd like to ask of this witness, Mr. Evans?
No, I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks very much. Thanks for being here. Mr. Nicola, any other members of the public who'd like to ask questions of this witness?
Yeah, next is Kim McGovern.
Okay.
All right, Ms. McGovern, how are you tonight? Could you state your name, spell your last name, and give us your address, please?
Sure. It's Kim McGovern, McGovern, and I'm at 142 Colonial Road.
All right, welcome this evening. Have you got some questions for Mr. Seckler?
I sure do.
Great.
And thank you for allowing us to speak. I've been logging on since August, and I think this is the first time I've ever been able to do this, so I'm happy to finally have a voice.
It's been extreme.
Yes. My first question is, has Primrose ever had a patron of theirs hit a child during drop off or pickup on or near one of their properties?
I don't know that answer.
Okay. Was curious with your studies. Did you look at any traffic studies between, you just mentioned, answering another person, that a heavy time for the school for Primrose would be 3:30 to 4:15. I mean, we've all established that you weren't able to do any traffic pattern studies during non-COVID times that would actually give a real world, picture of what really happens in our neighborhood. But did you do a traffic pattern study from 3:30 to 4:15 in the area?
Yes, we did. And just so you have the background, the information, what we utilized from this project was counts that were done in hourly counts that were done from April 24th to 2017 through April 26, 2017. So that was on the hour, every hour. We also had DOT data that was on Morris Avenue in this area, December 13th, 2011 through December 15th, 2011. So again, hourly data through that stretch. There was counts that were done on Morris Avenue down near Celgene in November 2017. Counts done further down on Morris, May 2016, and turning.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but what I'm assuming all those counts are vehicles of four wheels or more.
The DOT counts are vehicles only. We did counts in the area of the site in order to come up with turning movement data, and the counts we did included pedestrians. But again, it was during COVID, so that was on Wednesday, December 2nd, and that was from 6:30 to 9 and 3:30 to 6.
Okay, so I mean, I know that we've established you didn't do any pedestrian studies, but as far as those DOT studies, I mean, at that time, it could not be, as a parent of 4 children, very active in the Summit community, it could not be more crowded during the 3:30 to 4:15. Schools have been let out, high school drivers are on the road, there's sports going on at Tatlock, at Washington, at the high school, at Oratory. Kids are on their bikes, jaywalking across the street. Magic Fountain is open. This dance studio is open down the street with people dropping off. I know that, Mr. Warner, I can tell by your look on your face, but I'm just
it's question time. You're not under oath, so
thank you.
You have a question for Mr. Secretary.
I just wanted to establish that kind of study was not done.
That was the question.
Yeah.
What measures would the school take to prohibit parents from parking in the neighborhood and walking their children into schools?
I mean, I don't see any reason why a parent would walk further from the school than they would need to. We're providing them the closest parking spaces, and we believe an available number of parking spaces within the site itself. Again, when parents sign their children up, they get a whole pamphlet and form, and I know that Primrose has done this in the past, where if there's any specific requests or regulations, they basically include it within their sign-up forms and their kind of contracts with the parents. So if it's something that the board wishes to see within the contract, says that parents are not to park on whatever street that you'd like to name it on, it's obviously something that we can consider if the board thinks that's a useful condition.
As far as the actual construction, if you were to be, if Primrose was to be approved, there's an awful lot of construction to happen in order to get your picture that you developed to actually come to reality. In this, how long do you expect construction to take place, and what rules will be in place for the construction trucks and construction vehicles? And I'm just curious if any of your studies, you did any study for traffic impacts, stoppages, and closures for such construction equipment. And I'm just based on the amount of traffic snarls and stoppages and backups that there was from the senior housing being built. I'm just curious how, before the permeable roads could even open, what kind of traffic, did you do any construction traffic?
So for construction timeline, it takes about 8 months to construct a site. The one benefit we have here, I would say from a construction accessibility standpoint, is that because we're maintaining an existing building, one of the buildings is maintained and the parking lot is generally being maintained as well, we're actually able to do the majority of the construction internal to the site itself. So basically utilizing the existing, I'll call it eastern lot, will be kind of like the staging ground or the area that could be utilized to construct the majority of the site. That said, if there's any specific road closures, sidewalk that needs to be repoured, small closures, we'd obviously have to coordinate with the construction official. We need to follow all city and county requirements. In terms of any type of lane closures along Morris Avenue, we'd be required to follow the Union County guidelines, which typically will not allow us to do any construction during peak hours. So we'd have to be outside of peak hours in this location. We have a bus stop in front. We'd have to make sure we coordinate with NJ Transit. So there's a lot of agencies that the construction team that Primrose that works with Primrose has to follow. But I'm confident that this is a site, because we're maintaining almost half of the site as is, allows us to construct from internal as opposed to needing to do it all from the street.
Okay, I'll say the rest for public comment.
Thank you, Mr. Garden. Mr. Nicola, do we have other members of the public who would like to speak, ask questions of this witness? And so let me sort of say this too. I guess I'm not sure how many we have that would like to ask further questions of Mr. Seckler, but those members of the public who are listening, if they could please confine their comments to new questions. And if it's been asked before, please don't repeat the question so that we can get through this expeditiously. I guess in thinking this through, and Mr. Warner, you may want to comment on this, but I think I'd like to get through the questions for Mr. Seckler tonight. And I guess at that point, cut the meeting off. And then our next meeting coming up, since it's now just about 11 o'clock, our next meeting coming up would be in the next month to start with public comment from that point forward. Does that seem to make sense to you, Mr. Warner?
That appears to be the case if we are able to conclude the public questioning of the last witness of the applicant this evening. Yes.
No. Okay. So, Mr. Nicola, I see that Mr. Rodriguez is here. And Mr. Rodriguez, could you state your name and spell your last name and give us your address?
Good evening, good night. Alexander Rodriguez, R-O-D-R-I-G-U. I live at 38 Webster Avenue.
Great, thanks for being here tonight. You got a question for Mr. Seckler?
Yes, I want to thank all the board members for all their time. I know this has gone on for quite a bit. I guess I just want to get a clarification as to the residential buffer. I guess at one point it was 42.5 feet. And now it's, I guess it was stated it's at 36 feet. Can you explain the difference, why it went down?
Yeah, the calculation initially was incorrect. The buffer relates to, for a property like this, should have been measured from the depth of the property. And what the 42.5 feet residential buffer was when it was measured widthwise as what, so it was unfortunately measured, it was measuring the wrong dimension originally when that calculation was made.
Thank you for that clarification. So the correct number is the 36 feet that's required for the residential buffer.
That's my understanding, and I believe the board professionals have confirmed that as well at this point.
So, so we're asking for a variance for that residential buffer. So what is the variance for? Like, is it for the playground? Is that where the variance is coming into play?
The ordinance requires that for all of the properties in this B zone that abut a residential zone, immediately abut, it requires 20% of that dimension. So in our case, the residential zone is behind us. It requires 20% of our depth to be dedicated as a buffer, basically used as a buffer. So landscaping solely. So we are required to have 36 feet based on our property dimensions left as a buffer for this development. I would state that I don't know when that ordinance went into place, but I've driven past or into all of the B zone properties along this stretch of Morris Avenue. I think that includes from, I think it goes down to the Lakeland Bank and Lafayette to the west. And I think it extends all the way to, I think it's Weaver to the east. All of those properties have less of a buffer area. So all of these properties have pre-existing non-conforming conditions where they don't meet the requirement. On our case, I think we're making a substantial increase of buffer compared to what's out there today.
But I guess the only thing in violation is the raised portion of the playground.
No, I mean, I'll correct you. No, the parking lot in the rear of the site, basically the parking spaces that there's a row of 11 parking spaces. Those are in violation of the buffer, and the 3 parallel parking stalls and access onto Gates Avenue would be in the buffer.
Okay. And I guess the other question is, I guess coming up Morris Avenue, can we limit the amount of cars parking on Morris Avenue right in front of your building? Because right now, as I currently exit Webster Avenue, there's always cars parked up along that right-hand side. As people are going to try to make a right-hand turn onto Primrose, there's always cars parked up along there. There's even cars parked up along further up after your driveway. There's an additional 2 cars parked there. Just curious if we can limit parking there. And it's also an impediment when people are exiting, making a left-hand turn, having all those cars parked there along Morris Avenue. Something that we can do to have that left hand be a clearer exit.
So there's nothing that we or you or I could specifically do. That's usually a governing body issue. So that would have to go to the council. They normally regulate parking regulations. In addition, it's possible the county may make a similar recommendation because obviously it's their roadway. So we would have to work with that, but it's obviously nothing that I think this board or the applicant has jurisdiction on to enforce, but it's obviously something we could take under consideration and make the recommendations to the bodies that have that power.
Yeah, I think it would be important people, again, making it left out of your driveway, specifically now the way you guys have people coming out, making, possibly that left-hand turn. And I guess another question in regards to that, in the future, if there was a lot of accidents, people making a left-hand turn, in the future, is that, I guess, what governing body would be able to limit from doing that, making that left-hand turn if there happens to be a number of accidents, making a left out of your Primrose parking lot?
I might defer this to Mr. Warner, but I believe that there's a police power that could be enforced if there's a safety issue post occupation. He looks like he's thinking about it, but
no, well, again, beyond the jurisdiction of the board, we can't impose a condition, but yes, the governing body through existing ordinances and including police powers, and particularly if there's health and safety involved, can address that. But again, not as part of this application process or approval process, or if there is one, or compliance process, if there is an approval, just simply separate and apart as part of the police powers of the governing body.
Right, and I guess, we were mentioning, like I said, we're not even sure if that left-hand turn is going to be approved by the county road surface system. I guess my other question obviously I guess my thought was when you exit the property, could you have one left-hand turn and then have one right-hand turn if you eliminate the 3 parallel parking spots on the right-hand side?
it would get a little tight. I think ideally even though we're required 31 parking spaces, I would like to have as close to 35 as possible. So I think having those spaces may be more valuable than having the separate right and left turn lanes. In addition, that does widen the driveway. The county, from a pedestrian standpoint, doesn't love super wide driveways for pedestrians that would need to walk across the driveways. Sometimes side-by-side cars create some visibility issues when the car's looking to make a left turn. The guy kind of sneaking around to the right can't always see, because the car's blocking him. So I appreciate that suggestion. I just don't think it's going to work well in this location.
And then some additional questions in regards to the HVAC equipment. Where was all the HVAC equipment going to be housed? Was it going to be on the lower building, or was it going to be on the bigger 2-story building?
That's a little out of my league,
Yeah,
but let me see if I could
have-
see a quick.
I think Mr. Kasay could probably quickly answer that question, and he provided testimony before, but if we can have Mr. Kasay address that question.
There will be equipment on both roofs. On the addition, that equipment will be screened by a 4-foot parapet.
And then I guess the other thing that I'm still concerned about is the height of the playgrounds. The height of the playground, you still have to, there's still a number of steps that you have to come up from the parking lot. That comes up, I guess, I don't know, 4 risers, 5 risers up to the playground. Is there a way we can lower that playground, I guess, pedestal or location so it's not as high? And it's if that was the case, then it's also going to reduce the number, the height, the number of retaining walls that you need on the Webster Avenue side. Is there a way that we can lower the playground so it doesn't necessarily have to be so high off the parking lot off of Webster Avenue?
Yeah, the issue is that the grade of the playground needs to match the finished floor of that building so that it serves as both an egress point from the structure, as well as, when you have young children that may need to be in a stroller type operation, or even any toddler, the less steps the better when going from the classroom into the playground area. So the height of the playground is basically meant to be equal to the floor, the doorways in the structure itself. The stairway is not the common path to the playground, because it's basically accessed from the interior of the site, if that makes sense, from the classroom area.
But couldn't you find other ways to get down to the playground? Couldn't you do ramps coming off the building, do a landing, and then do ramps down to the playground? So again, the playground is not up on this high pedestal that it seems to be currently. So you can find other ways to do that so it's not as high.
Again, I think we've tried to eliminate certain levels of ramps because they do tend to be tripping hazards for young children. For me and you, it's probably not even noticeable. But again, the Primrose design is to have that kind of walkout right to the playground design, because it is intended for young children, and that's the design that they have is that level, as opposed to having zigzag ramps or ramps that require additional railings and things of that nature. So the design is to have that finished floor be the walkout floor for the playground.
Thank you. Those are all my questions.
Mr. Chairman, while Chris brings up the next person, there are 4 people with their hands raised. Just to make you aware of that.
4 board members or 4?
Excuse me, there are 4 people in the audience with their hands raised remaining.
Okay, so we have 4 more members of the public, and that would be, I guess, would be it at this point. Is that right?
There's now 1 more person with their hand up. So we have another 4 after Ms. Brown.
Okay, Ms. Brown, could you state your name, spell your last name, and tell us your address?
Hi, Beverly Brown, BROWN, 221 Kent Place Boulevard.
Good, thank you for being here tonight. You have a question, Mr. Seckler?
Yes, I do, and thanks to all the board members who apparently are not night owls here. because I never see anybody nodding off. So credit goes to you guys.
You consume a lot of caffeine.
Yeah. Cheers to that. So, Mr. Seckler, just a couple random questions from listening to your testimony tonight and during multiple previous occasions. So first is probably the newest question. Did your traffic study take into account the new public housing development that is slated to be built in Chatham on River Road, which is only about a mile away from, as the crow flies, from this site on Morris Avenue?
It does not take that specific site into account, but it does have general background growth, which accounts for a certain percentage of growth, I'd say, from neighboring communities that can add traffic here.
Okay, all right, thank you. And then I had asked a previous question. I just wanted to make sure there was no update. During a previous session, I asked if your traffic study took into account the use of traffic patterns using a Waze or Google Maps app. Have you been able to update your study with that technology in mind?
No, it doesn't, because I don't know what the real-time traffic conditions are going to be like at the time that this site opens. So it uses, basically, I would say, it does not use that type of dynamic metric.
Okay. And then I just, last question, I thought my neighbor Kim McGovern had a great question about pedestrians struck. So I know you couldn't answer her question whether there was any patron of Primrose School who would have unfortunately hit and struck a pedestrian in the area. But I see Matt Taylor from Primrose on the call. I'm not sure whether I'm allowed to ask him a question or not, but could you speak to that, Mr. Taylor?
Frankly, Mr. Warner, I don't know the relevancy of the question. Each site stands on its own, and how has any relevance to the bearing on this application?
If Mr. Taylor is, or I should say, if you're willing to have Mr. Taylor answer the question, the board can assess the relevancy of the answer of the question.
Thank you, Mr.
And its analysis of the positive and negative criteria for variance relief that's being sought, if any.
Yeah, good evening, Ms. Brown. Yeah, I have no knowledge of it. I've been with the company about 5 years, and we have 455 locations across the country.
Okay.
In the last 5 years, I have no knowledge of a child being hit or any pedestrian being hit for that matter.
Okay, I appreciate that. That's
Thank you so much.
something we've unfortunately had some experience with here in this town, probably other towns as well. That concludes my questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. All right.
The reporter, may I just ask, was Mr. Taylor previously sworn?
He was,
Yes.
but thank you for reminding me to say that, Mr. Taylor, you know you remain under oath with respect to the last question and any subsequent questions, correct?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. And thank you, Madam Court Reporter.
Yes, thanks there, Bridget. All right, Mr. McCullough.
Yeah, Eileen Cohout is now in.
Sorry, my video just went out.
Good evening, Ms. Cohout. Could you?
Yep, I don't know. I lost connection there for a minute.
I see,
It's Eileen Cohout, Kohaut. I'm at 9 Gates.
Okay, great.
My question is, do your other sites have exits onto more residential streets? I understand that zoning wise, it's probably about 5 feet off of a residential street, but do you have exits onto residential streets?
Is that a question for me or Mr. Taylor?
Whoever can field it. I'm fine with whoever wants to answer it.
Trying to.
I can certainly answer that question, Ms. Cohout. We have locations in multiple demographic areas. You know, we have schools that are located in the middle of neighborhoods. So, yeah, and the answer would be yes. But yeah, I
I
can't.
would say, I guess I should clarify to ask that those in our surrounding location, because I'm sure some of your locations are quite different across the country than they, but say Mountainside, Berkeley Heights, those that can relate to Summit.
Well, Mountainside and Berkeley Heights certainly do not, but I can tell you in our portfolio, we have multiple sites that have access into neighborhoods. I can't point to one specifically within our general location here of Summit, but we definitely have them in our portfolio.
And do they have more than one exit?
Absolutely. Yeah, most of our sites typically have more than one means of egress in and out. I mean, it's just a proper design if we can figure it out.
Those locations locally.
Yep, Matt.
No,
This is Matt Seckler for the record, Matt. I got one example. The Wayne site that we worked on actually has access around 2 residential dwellings, and then every unit to the north for, I don't know, quarter mile
And I'm
is
taking it
residential.
that it's similar to what the setup here in Summit is.
It
It's off a
actually,
county road and
it's actually very similar, Ms. Scarlett, and actually it was just opened last year. So Matt, thank you. I did not think about when.
and then are 2 exits necessary? I mean, I know we need it for emergency vehicles, but are 2 exits necessary? We're here, we've already created traffic issues that I get pertains use of the property might not affect the area, but it is in a neighborhood. So it is going to affect the neighborhood. And do we need 2 exits is, I guess, my other question.
And again, Matt Seckler for the record. Again, if the board wishes for us to put out cones every morning and try to keep the cars onto Morris, and that's what, resolves any issues with Gates Avenue. Again, we're trying to push as much traffic onto Morris Avenue as possible and keep it away from Gates by creating the 2-way driveway on Morris Avenue. So again, we keep trying to push the needle more towards Morris Avenue, away from Gates, because of the comments raised and yourself and the other neighbors. So again, we're trying to do as best we can. We need to have that second driveway because we need the occasional delivery, the fire truck, the garbage truck, and we need access to those three more parking spaces they're closest to Gates Avenue. But again, as much as we could limit it, if that's what the board wishes, and they
Well, my
that-
understanding is our oratory prep has an entrance onto their property that's essentially blocked off except for use, I'm assuming for emergency vehicles. Is that an option? And my other question is, do the county and local summit boards confer on different things because the jurisdiction is there for them to approve?
I can't speak to oratory prep. I'm unfamiliar with their setup. So
I just mentioned that because I think the board probably is aware that it's actually a closed exit to daily traffic, but it's existing for emergency.
When we reviewed it, we made that for just emergencies, and it's only used for that.
Right. That's.
I guess one thing too here, Mr. Seckler, there was a drive on Webster Avenue that's been eliminated, right? So we had 3 at one time. We now have 2. I guess that's
it's actually, there were 2 on Webster Avenue we eliminated. So we've taken out a number of driveways as part of this.
Okay.
And are you any other pending questions?
No, I guess that's fine. I just was thinking Mr. Seckler was going to add more.
Okay.
I gave my first short answer of the night, I guess.
That's for sure.
Mr. Chairman, are we going to our next questioner?
Thanks, Ms. Cohen. Thanks for being here. All right, Mr. Nicola.
And next is a phone number, actually. So I'm gonna hit the allow to talk button and then we'll have to identify who they are.
Okay.
If
Chris,
they're on
are
the
they on
phone,
mute?
yeah, they might be, if on the phone, they might be explained how to unmute themselves.
Yeah, Zoom does that, but in case they're listening, it's *9 to raise the hand, and then once you've been acknowledged, which you have been, it's *6 to unmute.
It's 917-843-6119.
Is it *7 to unmute, Chris?
It is
6.
*6.
*6, my apology. Do we want to try for the next questioner
I think we
while
should go, keep this person in the queue and go to the next person
Right.
here.
hopefully they can unmute?
Maybe they fell asleep.
Okay.
Okay, Miss Lemio.
Very good.
Hi.
Hi, you ready?
Yeah, we are. Can
Okay,
you,
it's Laura,
state your
Laura
name, spell your
Lamio.
last name, and give us your address.
Sure, Laura Lamio, L-A, M as in Mary, E-O, at 9 Webster.
Good evening.
Good evening. This may be for Mr. Taylor. My question is, does Primrose use the facility after hours or on the weekends for, like, say, a family celebration, a family picnic, or are the hours of operation always, between what you stated before? Because I guess our concern in the neighborhood would be, a weekend celebration where you have traffic again on Saturday and Sunday. And if it is used in other locations for those purposes, would it be possible to put in a resolution that this location would not be used at nighttime and weekends for outside activities? And even whether it's from an outside contractor, that maybe you guys let the facility use for the indoor playground for a birthday party or something. I'm just thinking of, even without the office space, other uses of the facility.
Sure, I can answer that. Typically, it's 5-day-a-week operation for childcare. Would we have an open house when we're rolling on a weekend? Most likely. But it would be, a controlled environment. We wouldn't expect 200 people to show up for an open house. We do not contract or subcontract the buildings out to third party. There's obviously far too much liability to do that. So really the business should be generally a 5-day-a-week operation where we are, providing childcare during the Monday through Friday timeframe. So I hope that answers your question. But will there be some activity on a weekend at some point? Most likely, but it'll be related to enrollment.
Okay, no, that does. Thank you. Another question, if Primrose sees that traffic is backing up, and as we all in the neighborhood predict, there will be issues with turning out of the parking lot. Summit High School last year during the normal school year had a police officer, whether it was a Summit police officer or a Union County police officer, help people make left-hand turns out to Morris Avenue from the Weaver Avenue exit. Has Primrose ever needed to, or will they be willing to hire 5 days a week during peak hours a police officer to, number one, help with the turns? And I also worry about children walking up Morris Avenue, having that kind of cat and mouse, like, do I go or is this car making a turn? And if a police officer is ever needed on your locations, or if that's something that you would consider.
No, it's not something we would do. Because we're designing the site honestly to accommodate what we feel is a reasonable egress and ingress for the people that are going to be using it. We wouldn't pursue a site that we didn't feel was safe, and we feel the site is safe and meets that criteria.
Okay, that's okay. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Nicola, anyone else?
Yeah, we have 2 more hands up. Here we go.
Ms. Gagnon, how are you? You're on mute there. Oh, there you are.
Hi.
Ms. Gagnon, how are you?
Hi, good. So I have a couple questions.
Could you, just for the record, could you just state your name and spell your last name and tell us your address?
Sure, Dory Gagnon, Gagnon, 27 Bedford Road.
Great.
Hi, good evening. So I have a couple questions. So in regards to the traffic study, you guys stated that it was 2017 that you also included one, correct?
What we did is we took a number of data points, but what we determined was some of those data points were unrealistic because of the reconstruction of the Morris Avenue Bridge near Kent Place, the railroad bridge there. So we had to not utilize all of those data points. So I believe that bridge was under construction 2015 to 2017. So majority of our analysis was based on a 2011 set of counts. And then we basically looked at the some of the 2017 down at Celgene in that area to kind of help monitor and understand how traffic has grown. We did our own counts during COVID, and we utilized a background growth rate of 0.6% annually compounded year over year from 2011 all the way to current day. So sorry for the long-winded answer, but unfortunately with COVID, I couldn't just, what I would normally do, send someone out there, do counts and be happy with the data. It took a lot of different data points to get to a set of data that we liked.
So you might not be aware, but I live right across the new Oratory School building. So that data is not including that new building that lives right across the street from me. So to your point, and everybody living on the other side of Morris Avenue from me, that traffic study does not include all of the students entering and exiting onto Morris Avenue that now live across the street from me and go to school across the street from me. So I really think that your traffic study that you did during COVID needs to be done again. And I think that this whole thing should be tabled until you get a new traffic study done when all of the kids are back in school and all of the businesses are back and everyone is in full effect. Because, and I can tell you this, I contested too when we were back in doing the oratory, I was really firm on this traffic study and telling that we had all of these kids walking to and from the school. A child got hit at the corner of Bedford and Morris. Okay, a child got hit. And there are children right in that area where this school is being located, more children than there were in where I am right now. And it is imperative that a proper study is done. Not one that's done when nobody is going to school, not one is done when oratory is not there, not when people are not going to work and doing Zoom calls from their home. It has to be done and a proper study needs to be done. So that was my question. That's what I'm going to say. The other thing I want to ask is that you guys just mentioned that the building's not going to be rented out after hours. How do we know that the building's not going to be rented out after hours? Because, you know, as I said, I live across the street from Oratory School and the building is rented out after hours now, and there is no penalties and nothing's being done. And now cars are being parked up and down the street. So how do we know that this building is not going to be rented out and there is not going to be parking up and down Webster Avenue and Montrose and up on that down on Morris Avenue and Gates and everything else? And kids aren't going to be on the playground, and it's not going to be a nuisance for everybody out on the weekends or after hours. What's going to be done for people that are living in the area to make sure that this isn't going to be a problem after that this variance is passed?
Ms. Gagnon, I addressed it, and I'm going on the record as addressing that we do not lease out our buildings for weekend use. So I don't know what else I can say. If the board wants to condition something, I think that's fine as well. But I am telling you that we do not lease out these buildings.
Okay,
and the applicant is stipulating to having that as a condition of approval in the resolution should the board grant the approval. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
and the resolution will be recorded. It'll be in the chain of title and compliance. While this board cannot handle compliance, They spend many of their waking volunteer hours handling the applications, and in fairness to them, but the city does handle compliance, and the city will handle compliance. And one of the mechanisms is reports from neighbors. But
Wonderful.
Mr. Delory gave a much more eloquent and detailed explanation of how to do it on the website with a form or
Fantastic.
something, if I recall correctly.
Fantastic. And if there is an issue with parking on the street, that I know that neighbors can create an ordinance to put up parking and such, where parking is not, you know, I had to do that on Bedford, where parking is not on one side of the street or whatever it is. Hopefully that won't need to happen if parents are parking on the street, and hopefully Primrose will, you know, be accommodating if there are issues, or if they do have, you know, back to school issues, maybe put up flags, or maybe they can work with the neighbors where they put out flags that say no parking, or talk to the neighbors and such before there's a situation. I know that's always important. So maybe the planning board can talk to them and say, if there is such an event, that such XYZ is done ahead of time to alleviate any kind of parking issue. Is that possible?
We will certainly comply with, you know, any municipal authority that we need to comply with related to parking around the site.
Okay.
Happy just to go on record with that.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gagnon. All right, Mr. Nicola, we have one more.
Yeah, it looks like the individual on the phone has unmuted.
Unmuted, okay. Who's ever on the phone, could you state your name and spell your last name for us and give us your address?
That is the 917-843-6119.
Oh, okay. Hello? Okay, Chris, let's go to the next person. We're getting Zoom bombed.
Yeah, there's only one other hand up, and it's Kim McGovern, who spoke earlier. And that would be the last.
All right. Well, if she has a new question, then we're going to cut it off at this point after Ms. McGovern. So let's let her back in and see if she has a different question. Hello, Ms.
Hi,
McGovern.
good evening. Sorry, I just, based on my, do I have to restate any of my address or anything?
No, it's no, you've already done that. Can you,
Okay.
another question? Different question for Mr. Seckler?
Yes, it's, I guess, I don't know if the right word is segue or what have you, but I earlier asked about children being hit by cars, and Beverly Brown did as well. And like, could either of
Yeah, Mr. Taylor addressed it, but maybe he could repeat it.
Well, I just like, I mean, their Dallas Fort Worth site had such an incident happen. So if he told me that they're unaware of any pedestrians being hit or children's being hurt on their sites, there's well-documented places. So I just wanted to bring that up as people are under oath. And that's something that
there'll be time if Ms. McGovern wants to present any evidence, and we can deal with the relevancy of an accident in Texas.
So, Mr. Governor, it was really more of a statement in this case as opposed to a question. You're bringing up something that was different than what we'd heard previously. It's a fact, in other words. You're bringing a fact to us.
My question was, are they aware of what happened in Dallas on their property with pedestrian accident with children involved?
Maybe Mr. Taylor can respond to that.
Mr. McGovern, I'm happy to respond. As I said earlier, I am unaware of that problem you brought up, and I don't know when it happened. Honestly, as I said, I've been with the company for 5 years. I'm not aware of it.
2017.
I'm not saying it didn't
Okay.
happen. I said I'm not aware of any of those incidents happening.
Okay. All right. Well, that's unfortunate.
That's all I can do. So,
All
thank
right.
you.
That's unfortunate that you're not aware. Thank you. Good evening.
Okay. Good night. All right. Let's wrap this up, Mr. Nicola. Do we have one other? You kind of looked hesitant there.
That's all the hands, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, very good. All right. Well, I know the board is going to be disappointed, but I guess at this point we're going to have to postpone public comments.
Mr. Chairman, before we do though, I think it's important that we confirm with applicant's counsel that the applicant has now completed its direct case. Is that correct, Mr. Giannetti?
That is correct, Mr. Warner.
Okay, so now there will be no further witnesses on behalf of the applicant, so no further witnesses to be questioned on behalf of the applicant, at least on the direct case. And now we can proceed with public comment, public testimony, members of the public, any experts on their behalf. And yes, I believe, Mr. Chairman, we're going to be carrying that, but I'll let you finish that explanation.
No, that's basically where we're all headed, is that this will be carried to the next meeting. What that be, April 26th on a Monday evening, 7:30 p.m. There's no additional notice required here, Mr. Warner, or is there?
No, that's correct. It'll be carried, since we're announcing it now, it'll be carried without further notice, April 26, 2021, 7:30 p.m. Same Zoom web-based platform for virtual access. And we'll be commencing the public comment, public testimony, any experts on behalf of members of the public.
Okay, very good. And then at this point, with no other business to attend to as a board, can I have a motion to adjourn? And a second?
So moved.
And a second? Did we get a second on that, Chris?
Second.
All right, okay. I know you like to stay on longer, but anyway, thank you all very much, Mr. Giannetti, Mr. Seckler. Mr.
Thank
Taylor,
you, Chairman Anderson. Thank you, members of the board.
Thank you all.
And have a good evening. Yep, thanks.
Good night, everybody.